They told him he was nothing, so he studied the law, and when the law failed him, he said, "Fuck your system," opened a courtroom in hell, and put the entire hero world on trial. This man didn't become a hero, he became something better.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The day Izuku Midoriya's dream died was a Tuesday. He remembered that. He remembered the smell of the rooftop, concrete dust, old rain, the faint chemical bite of air conditioning units running on the floor below. He remembered the way All Might's deflated form looked against the gray sky, shoulders like coat hangers under a shirt 3 sizes too large, blood on his lips, eyes that wouldn't meet a 14-year-old boy's. "I'm sorry, young man. Without a quirk, you cannot become a hero." 6 words. That's all it took to kill a dream that had been alive since Izuku was 4 years old. 6 words from the one man on Earth whose opinion mattered more to him than oxygen. Izuku stood on that rooftop for a long time after All Might left. The wind pushed his hair around. His notebook, the 13th volume of hero analysis, filled cover to cover with strategies and observations and the kind of detail that would make intelligence agencies nervous, sat heavy in his hands. He didn't cry. Not yet. He looked out over Musutafu. The skyline was clean. Hero agencies dotted the horizon like monuments. Somewhere out there, a pro-hero was saving someone. Somewhere else, a pro-hero was ignoring someone who needed saving because the cameras weren't rolling. Izuku closed his eyes, and the memories hit him like a freight train. It came in fragments at first, a courtroom, wood-paneled walls, the weight of a suit jacket on his shoulders, the sound of a gavel, not a judge's gavel, but something heavier, something that hummed with an energy that had no name in this world, a woman crying on a witness stand, a man in handcuffs who shouldn't have been there. The taste of coffee gone cold, papers spread across a desk at 3 in the morning, the certainty, bone deep, unshakable, that the evidence proved innocence and the system was going to ignore it anyway. Then the fragments became a flood. Hiromi Higuruma, defensive, brilliant, obsessive, a man who believed in the law the way most people believed in gravity, as a force that held the world together, invisible and essential. He had fought for the wrongfully accused. He had stood in courtrooms and dismantled prosecutions with logic so airtight that judges had no choice but to acquit. He had been good. He had been great. And the system had crushed him anyway. Izuku's knees hit the rooftop concrete. His hands pressed flat against the ground. The memories kept coming. They weren't visions. They weren't dreams. They were experiences. Lived, breathed, suffered through. He felt every late night, every lost case that should have been won, every time the scales tipped because someone with power decided the law was a suggestion. He felt the moment Higuruma broke. The moment cursed energy erupted from a human soul that had been denied justice so many times that it generated its own. He felt the gavel form for the first time. Heavy. Final. He felt judgment stir behind him, that massive, silent shikigami with its robes and its scales, the embodiment of a broken man's need for absolute truth in a world that ran on lies. He felt the domain open, and he understood. Izuku Midoriya opened his eyes. The rooftop looked the same. Musutafu looked the same. The world looked the same. He didn't. He held up his right hand. Something moved beneath his skin. Not a quirk. Something older, something that operated on entirely different principles. Energy, dense, potent, responsive to his emotions and his will. It coiled through his body like a second circulatory system. He could feel it in his bones, in his teeth, behind his eyes. Cursed energy. He was the only person alive who had it. The only person alive who even knew what it was. Izuku stood up. He wiped the dust off his knees. He looked at his hero analysis notebook one more time. Then he dropped it off the side of the building. He watched it fall. 13 volumes of a dead dream, pages fluttering loose in the wind, scattering across the alley below like confetti at a funeral nobody attended. "All right," Izuku said to no one. His voice was steady. Flat. The voice of a man who had just remembered he'd already lived an entire life as someone else. "If power is law in this world, then I'll become the law." He walked off that rooftop a different person. The world just didn't know it yet. Izuku Midoriya noticed the change immediately. Her son came home that evening and sat down at the kitchen table without turning on the TV. He didn't pull up hero footage on his phone. He didn't ask about All Might's latest rescue. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and said, "Mom, I want to study law." Izuku blinked. "Check. I want to become a defense attorney." She stared at him. This was the same boy who had cried every night for a week after the Quirkless diagnosis. The same boy who had filled notebooks with hero data and slept in All Might pajamas until he was 12. The same boy who had come home today with his uniform scuffed and his eyes red. But the boy sitting at her table didn't look like that boy anymore. His posture was different, straighter. His eyes were different, focused in a way she had never seen, like he was reading the fine print on reality itself and finding errors. "Izuku, honey, you're 14. Law school is... I can study independently. The Japanese bar exam doesn't have an age requirement for sitting. It has a difficulty requirement. I'll pass it." "Izuku, I've been wasting time," he said it simply. No bitterness, no anger, just fact. There are people in this country, quirkless people, people with weak quirks, people the hero system chews up and spits out, who have nobody in their corner, nobody who knows the law well enough to fight for them. I'm going to be that person. Izuku looked at her son for a long, long time. She saw something in his eyes that scared her a little, not because it was dangerous, because it was certain. 14-year-olds weren't supposed to be this certain about anything. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, Izuku." He nodded once, stood up, went to his room. That night, Izuku pressed her ear to his door and heard nothing. No crying, no hero videos, no muttering, just the sound of pages turning, textbook after textbook, law after law. Her son had found something to believe in again, and it terrified her that it wasn't a dream this time. It was a decision. Let's talk about what Izuku Midoriya did over the next 2 years, because the legal world still hasn't recovered. He dropped out of Aldera Junior High, filed for independent study. Nobody fought him on it. The school was glad to see a quirkless kid leave. One less problem, one less lawsuit waiting to happen when Katsuki Bakugo inevitably went too far. Bakugo, for his part, heard that Midoriya had dropped out and laughed about it for approximately 1 lunch period before forgetting about him entirely. The idea that the quirkless nobody he'd bullied for a decade might become relevant to his life in any capacity didn't even register as a possibility. That would age poorly. Izuku buried himself in legal texts. Constitutional law, criminal law, civil procedure, evidence law, the Hero Regulation Acts, the quirk usage statutes, the commission oversight provisions. He consumed it all. But he didn't just memorize it. He understood it. He saw the architecture of the legal system the way an engineer sees a building. Every load-bearing wall, every structural weakness, every crack that someone with enough pressure could exploit. And there were a lot of cracks. The Hero Public Safety Commission operated in a gray zone that most lawyers didn't touch. They had authority over hero licensing, hero deployment, and this was the part that mattered, hero accountability. When a pro-hero caused collateral damage, the commission decided whether to investigate. When a pro-hero was accused of a crime, the commission decided whether it reached a courtroom. The foxes were running the hen house, and the hens had been told it was for their own protection. Izuku mapped every case where the commission had intervened, every settled complaint, every sealed record, every civilian who had been quietly paid off or quietly silenced. He built a database on his laptop that grew thicker every week. Cross-referenced by hero agency, by judge, by commission liaison officer, he was building a case, not against any single person, against the system itself. While his mind worked the law, his body worked something else entirely, cursed energy. Every night, after the textbooks were closed, Izuku went to the parking structure 3 blocks from his apartment. the one that had been condemned after an earthquake and never demolished. He stood on the empty third floor, surrounded by cracked concrete and rusted rebar, and he trained. He had no teacher, no manual, no senpai to show him the basics. Everything he knew came from Higuruma's memories, and Higuruma had been a self-taught genius in his own right. The man had gone from zero combat experience to fighting Yuji Itadori, a vessel who had trained under the strongest sorcerer alive and had pushed him to the edge. Higuruma had developed domain expansion, a technique that most sorcerers trained their entire lives to achieve. Through sheer talent and emotional intensity alone, Izuku had all of that. Every technique, every instinct, every hard-won adaptation. And he had something Higuruma never had. Time. Time without a death game breathing down his neck. Time to refine what Higuruma had built in desperation. He started with the basics. Cursed energy reinforcement, flooding his body with energy to harden his skin, strengthen his muscles, increase his speed. The first night, he punched a concrete pillar and cracked it. The impact traveled up his arm and rattled his teeth, but the skin on his knuckles didn't break. The energy absorbed the blowback. By the end of the first week, he was punching through concrete pillars. Clean. No pain. The gavel came next. He held out his hand and pulled it from nothing. A dense, dark weapon that hummed with purpose. It was heavier than it looked. It always had been. The first time Higuruma summoned it, it had felt like holding a sentence. Izuku felt the same thing. Weight. Finality. He practiced the transformations. Extended handle, a staff, perfect for range and sweeps. Widened head, a warhammer that could crater the ground. Curved end, a hook for catching limbs, weapons, throats. Each form shifted smoothly, the cursed energy reshaping the tool like clay on a wheel. He drilled transitions. Staff to hammer in a single motion, hammer to hook mid-swing, hook back to standard gavel between heartbeats. He was fast. Faster than he had any right to be. Higuruma had been fast too. Fast enough to react to Itadori, who moved like a bullet with legs. Izuku's body was younger, lighter, with none of the wear that years of legal stress had put on Higuruma's frame. The cursed energy flowed through him like water through a riverbed that had been carved for exactly this purpose. By the end of the first month, he was moving through combat forms at a speed that would make most pro heroes take a step back. By the end of the third month, he was practicing domain amplification, wrapping his body in the aura of his domain to neutralize external energy effects on contact. This was the technique that had made Higuruma dangerous even against sorcerers with superior raw power. It was a defensive coating that turned the user's body into a dead zone for incoming techniques. In this world, that meant quirks. Any quirk-based attack that touched Izuku while domain amplification was active would have its effect nullified at the point of contact. He tested it by having pigeons land on his amplified arm. Nothing happened to the pigeons. Domain amplification was precise. It only neutralized external techniques, not passive biology. He needed a better test subject. He'd get one eventually. By the end of the 6th month, he sat cross-legged on the 3rd floor of the parking structure and opened his domain for the first time in this life. The world folded. Reality split apart at the seams and reassembled into a massive courtroom. The walls stretched high, impossibly high, lined with dormant guillotines, their blades catching light from a source that didn't exist. 2 podiums faced each other across a floor of dark stone. Above it all, a sky that was neither day nor night. Just gray. Just still. The air inside was heavy with something that felt like truth. The kind of truth that didn't care about your feelings or your excuses or your status. Judgment materialized behind Izuku. Massive, silent, robes drifting like something underwater. Its face was unreadable. Its presence was absolute. Izuku stood at his podium and felt the domain settle around him like armor. Still works, he said. He dismissed it. The parking structure rebuilt itself around him. A crack ran through the ceiling that hadn't been there before. Izuku went home, ate dinner with his mother, and slept 7 hours. The next morning, he went back to his legal studies. The evening, he trained again. He did this every single day for 2 years. And on the day before his 16th birthday, Izuku Midoriya sat for the Japanese bar examination. The examiner who processed his application called her supervisor. Her supervisor called the regional administrator. The regional administrator called legal affairs at the Ministry of Justice. A 14-step chain of, is this even allowed, ended with a simple answer, yes. The bar exam had no minimum age requirement. If the applicant met the educational prerequisites through independent study certification, which Izuku did, he could sit. He walked into the examination hall in a pressed white shirt and dark slacks. Every other applicant was at least 10 years older than him. Some were 20 years older. They stared, a few laughed. One woman nudged her neighbor and whispered, "Is he lost?" Izuku sat down, opened the test booklet, and didn't look up for 7 hours. He passed. He didn't just pass. He scored in the top percentile. His essays on constitutional law were so precisely argued that 2 of the 3 grading professors requested copies for their own reference materials. His analysis of a hypothetical criminal case, a civilian accused of property destruction during a hero-villain altercation, was later cited in an actual legal journal as an example of incisive and fearlessly practical legal reasoning. He was 16 years old. The story hit the news. Not the front page, the legal section, buried after hero rankings and quirk regulation debates. As youngest bar exam passer in modern history. A few outlets ran short features, most of them focused on the novelty angle. Kid genius, feel-good story. Isn't that cute? None of them mentioned he was quirkless. Izuku didn't do interviews. He registered with the Bar Association, filed the paperwork for solo practice, and opened a one-room office in a building in downtown Musutafu that smelled like old carpet and cheap coffee. The sign on the door read, Midoriya Legal Defense. Pro bono cases accepted. He sat behind his desk alone and waited for his first client. The wait was short. The quirkless community in Japan was small, quiet, and terrified. 4% of the population. In a world where your power was your identity, having no power meant having no identity. Quirkless people were denied jobs, denied housing, denied basic respect. They were the permanent underclass, not by law, exactly, but by culture. The law said they had equal rights. Reality said something different, and when reality and the law disagreed, reality usually won. Unless you had a good lawyer. Izuku's first case was a quirkless factory worker named Sato Kenji. He'd been fired after a workplace accident caused by a coworker's quirk malfunction. The company blamed Sato, said he was in the wrong area, that his lack of a defensive quirk constituted negligence. They were trying to deny his workers compensation and have him blacklisted from the industry. The company's legal team was 3 attorneys from a prestigious firm that handled corporate quirk liability cases. They walked into the hearing expecting to steamroll a teenager. Izuku dissected their argument in 40 minutes. He cited 14 statutes, 3 precedent cases, and a regulatory memo from the Ministry of Labor that the opposing counsel clearly hadn't read. He proved that the workplace safety protocols hadn't been updated to account for the coworker's specific quirk, a clear violation of Section 7 of the Quirk Safety Act. He demonstrated that the company had received 2 prior warnings about this exact issue and had ignored both. He didn't raise his voice once. He spoke the way verdicts read, steady, precise, final. The arbitrator ruled in Sato's favor. Full compensation. The company was fined. Sato cried in the hallway outside. He grabbed Izuku's hand with both of his and couldn't let go. He kept saying thank you. Izuku stood there, 16 years old, a foot shorter than his client, and said, "You were innocent. That's all that matters." Word spread. The second case came within a week. A quirkless teenager expelled from school after a confrontation with a student whose quirk caused involuntary aggression spikes. The school blamed the quirkless kid. Izuku got the expulsion reversed and the school's disciplinary policy flagged for review. The third case came 3 days later. A quirkless woman denied custody of her children because the family court judge, who had a strength enhancement quirk, deemed her unable to provide adequate protection in a quirk-prevalent society. Izuku walked into that courtroom and took the judge's reasoning apart brick by brick, citing the anti-discrimination clause of the Quirk Equality Act so precisely that the appellate court overturned the decision without even calling a second hearing. The 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 10th. By his 17th birthday, Izuku Midoriya had handled over 40 cases. His win rate was 94%. The losses were all cases where the evidence had been sealed, destroyed, or tampered with by parties he couldn't reach through legal channels. Every one of those losses involved a pro-hero or the Hero Public Safety Commission somewhere in the chain He kept a list. Every case he should have won, every piece of evidence that vanished, every judge who looked him in the eye and ruled against facts. The list got longer, his reputation grew. In the Quirkless community, he became something close to a folk hero. The lawyer who fought for people nobody else would touch. The kid who walked into courtrooms full of adults and made them sweat. Defense attorneys twice his age started paying attention. Some of them respected him. Some of them were afraid of him. Not because he was threatening, but because he was exposing the cracks that they had built careers pretending didn't exist. In the hero community, he was a footnote, a curiosity. Some agencies heard about him through their legal departments and marked him as potentially troublesome, the kind of label that meant nothing until it meant everything. At the commission, someone opened a file with his name on it. Izuku didn't know about the file. He didn't need to. He knew they were watching. He could feel it. The same way Higuruma had felt it, that slow tightening of invisible walls when you started winning cases the system didn't want you to win. He kept winning anyway. Let's talk about what Izuku looked like at 17, because it matters for what comes next. He wasn't big. 5'9", lean, with dark green hair that he'd stopped trying to tame and just pushed back out of his face. His eyes were the problem. They were green, same as always, but something had changed behind them. People in courtrooms described it differently. Intense, unsettling, like he already knows what you're going to say. A defense attorney in Osaka who'd watched one of his hearings said, "He looks at you the way a surgeon looks at an x-ray, like he's already found what's wrong and he's deciding whether to tell you." He wore suits, always. Dark, simple, well-fitted but never flashy. A white shirt, a dark tie, sensible shoes. He looked like a young professional who happened to be a decade younger than everyone around him. He didn't smile much. He smiled when his clients were acquitted, but it was brief, a quick upturn of the mouth that disappeared before it could settle. Outside the courtroom, his default expression was neutral, watchful, a face designed for reading and not being read. He was, by every metric, the least remarkable-looking person in any room he entered, and that was the most dangerous thing about him. The case that broke everything was called Tanaka, the People. Ren Tanaka was a 34-year-old quirkless construction worker from the Shizuoka prefecture. Married, 2 kids, clean record. He had been on site when a building partially collapsed during a villain attack. A pro-hero, Bright Flame, real name Yoshida Kenji, ranked 32nd nationally. Fire-based Quirk, fan-favorite merchandise goldmine had responded to the attack. His fire blasts brought down the remaining structure. 3 civilians were killed in the collapse. Ren Tanaka survived but was found in the rubble next to the bodies. The commission moved fast. Within 48 hours, the narrative was set. The villain had caused the building collapse. Bright Flame had performed admirably. The 3 civilian deaths were a tragedy caused by the villain's actions. Case closed. Except one of the dead civilians was Ren Tanaka's wife. Ren Tanaka didn't believe the official story. He'd been there. He'd seen Bright Flame's fire blasts hit the load-bearing walls. He'd felt the building shift the wrong direction, not toward the villain, but toward the civilians the hero was supposed to be protecting. He went to the police. They referred him to the commission. The commission sent him a condolence letter and a sealed report that concluded, once again, that the villain was at fault. Ren Tanaka went looking for a lawyer. Every attorney in Shizuoka turned him down. Every attorney in Tokyo turned him down. They all said the same thing, in different words. You can't win a case against a ranked pro-hero backed by the commission. The evidence is sealed. The witnesses have been handled. Walk away. Ren Tanaka took a train to Musutafu. He walked into a one-room law office that smelled like old carpet and cheap coffee. He sat across from a 17-year-old attorney with green eyes that looked like they'd already seen the worst the world had to offer. He told his story. Izuku listened without interrupting. He took no notes. When Ren finished, Izuku was quiet for a long time. "You said the fire hit the east wall first," Izuku said. "Yes. The east wall was load-bearing." I think so." "It was. I pulled the building's architectural plans this morning." Ren stared at him. Izuku continued without explaining how he'd known to pull those plans before the meeting. Bright Flame's official statement says his first attack was aimed northwest, toward the villain's position. If that's true, the east wall shouldn't have been compromised, but it was. Silence. Mr. Tanaka, I'll take your case. Ren Tanaka started to shake. It was the first time in 4 months that someone had told him his reality was real. But I need you to understand something, Izuku said. His voice was level, his eyes didn't waver. If I take this to trial, the commission will fight back. They will use every resource they have. They will try to bury this case and everyone connected to it, including you, including me. I don't care. Good. Izuku stood up and extended his hand. I'll see you in court. The next 3 months were war. Izuku subpoenaed the original incident report from the Shizuoka Police Department. The commission had already sealed it. He filed a motion to unseal based on the public interest exception clause, an obscure provision that allowed sealed documents to be reviewed if there was credible evidence of a miscarriage of justice. The motion was denied by the first judge. Izuku appealed, denied again by the second. He appealed a third time and argued it before a 3-judge panel, citing 11 precedent cases where sealed hero incident reports had been unsealed for review. The panel ruled 2-1 in his favor. The report was released. It confirmed what Ren had said. The fire damage pattern was inconsistent with the official narrative. Bright Flame's first attack had hit the east wall. The collapse direction proved it. The commission sent lawyers, 3 of them. Senior counsel, the kind that charged hourly rates that would make a hospital bill look reasonable. They filed to have the report deemed inadmissible. Izuku countered every filing. They filed to have the case moved to a commission oversight tribunal instead of a public court. Izuku argued that the tribunal lacked jurisdiction over civilian manslaughter allegations and won. They filed a motion to seal the proceedings entirely, citing national hero safety concerns. Izuku responded with a brief so devastating that the judge read portions of it aloud in open court and denied the motion from the bench. Every legal maneuver the commission threw at him, Izuku caught, broke down, and turned into evidence of obstruction. He wasn't just defending Ren Tanaka anymore. He was building a record, a paper trail of every underhanded tactic the commission used to protect its heroes. Bright Flame's agency issued a public statement calling the lawsuit baseless and an attack on the heroes who risked their lives to protect us. Fan communities lit up. Ren Tanaka received death threats. Someone threw a brick through his apartment window with a note that said, "Go home, Quirkless." Izuku moved Ren and his kids to a safe location. He didn't tell anyone where. The trial date was set for November 15th. Public court. Judge Morimoto presiding. Izuku knew the name. Morimoto had presided over 4 hero-involved cases in the past 6 years. All 4 had been ruled in the hero's favor. All 4 had involved sealed evidence. All 4 had commission fingerprints on them. He knew what was coming. He prepared his case anyway. Every piece of evidence checked, double-checked, triple verified. Every witness statement corroborated. Every legal argument airtight, watertight, bulletproof. He built the kind of case that doesn't just prove guilt, it makes guilt undeniable. The kind of case that in a fair courtroom would end a career and start a criminal investigation. In a fair courtroom, November 15th. Tokyo District Court, 9 a.m. The gallery was full. Media in the back rows, not the big outlets who had been discouraged from covering the case, but independent journalists and legal bloggers who smelled blood in the water. Ren Tanaka sat behind the defense table in a borrowed suit, hands clasped, face gray, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from 4 months of being told your dead wife's murder was an inconvenience. Bright Flame sat in the gallery behind the prosecution. Full hero costume, because of course he did. Smiling, waving to people who recognized him. He'd done an interview that morning. Breakfast television, soft lighting, the host asking him how he stayed positive through this difficult time. He'd smiled and said, "I just keep thinking about all the people who believe in me." Izuku sat at the defense table, dark suit, white shirt, tie knotted properly for once. His case files were arranged in front of him, neat, ordered, lethal. He looked calm. He was. The trial began. Prosecution went first. The commission's team laying out the official narrative with the smooth confidence of people who had done this before and always won. The villain caused the collapse. Bright Flame acted within operational parameters. The civilian deaths were a tragic but unavoidable consequence of villain activity. They showed diagrams. They cited expert witnesses, commission-approved structural engineers who had examined the site after the commission had already cleaned it. Izuku let them finish. He didn't object once during their presentation. His pen moved across his notepad in small, precise strokes. Then it was his turn. He stood up. He didn't carry notes to the podium. He didn't need them. "Your Honor," Izuku said, "the prosecution has presented a narrative. I'm going to present the truth. They're not the same thing." He laid it out, step by step, piece by piece. The architectural plans showing the east wall was load-bearing. The fire damage analysis from an independent structural engineer, not commission-approved but nationally accredited, demonstrating that the burn pattern on the east wall was consistent with a direct, high-temperature blast at close range, not incidental fire spread. The timeline reconstruction proving that Bright Flame's first attack occurred 47 seconds before the villain was in a position that would have warranted a northwest strike, meaning the hero wasn't aiming at the villain. He was aiming at the building. Why? Because 2 of the 3 civilian casualties had been recording the fight on their phones. They were live streaming, and Bright Flame's response to the initial villain attack, the part before the building collapsed, had been slow, confused. He'd been hit twice before he'd returned fire. The footage, if it survived, would have shown a ranked pro hero performing far below his public image. The footage didn't survive. The phones were destroyed in the collapse, but Izuku had pulled the cellular provider records. The live stream had been broadcasting to a cloud server for 11 seconds before the signal cut. Those 11 seconds showed a fire blast aimed directly at the east wall of the building. The wall the streamers were standing behind. The courtroom was dead quiet. Izuku played the 11 seconds of recovered footage. Grainy, shaky, shot from a phone held at waist height. But clear enough. Bright Flame's arm extended. A plume of fire launched toward the camera. The last frame was white. 3 people died because a hero decided his reputation was worth more than their lives, Izuku said. The prosecution calls this a tragedy. I call it what it is. Murder, and the evidence supports that conclusion beyond any reasonable standard. He sat down. The gallery erupted. Journalists were typing. Lawyers in the audience were looking at each other with expressions that ranged from stunned to terrified. Bright Flame's smile was gone. Prosecution scrambled. They challenged the cellular records. Izuku produced the chain of custody documentation signed by the provider's chief records officer. They challenged the independent engineer. Izuku produced his credentials, his publication history, and his previous court testimony in 6 unrelated cases. All accepted, all unchallenged. They challenged the timeline reconstruction. Izuku walked them through it second by second, using the hero's own GPS tracking data that the commission had been required to provide under the unsealing order. Every argument they made, he was already there, waiting. Every escape route they tried, he'd already closed. The prosecution requested a recess. The judge granted it. During the recess, Izuku sat at the defense table and drank water. Ren Tanaka leaned over and whispered, "We're winning, aren't we?" Izuku looked at the judge's bench. Judge Morimoto had been writing notes. His pen had stopped moving 20 minutes ago. "We proved it," Izuku said. "Whether we win is a different question." Court reconvened at 2 p.m. Judge Morimoto looked at the prosecution. They had no further arguments. They had no further evidence. Their expert witnesses had been dismantled. Their narrative had holes the size of buildings. Judge Morimoto looked at the defense. He looked at his notes. He looked at Bright Flame in the gallery. Then Judge Morimoto, appointed by the district, confirmed by the regional judiciary, but funded through a pension program administered by the Hero Public Safety Commission, cleared his throat and delivered his ruling. The court finds the structural analysis presented by the defense to be compelling, but ultimately inconclusive. The recovered footage, while suggestive, is insufficient in both duration and quality to establish intent beyond reasonable doubt. The court notes that the independent engineering assessment, while professionally conducted, contradicts the conclusions of the commission's own investigative team. Izuku's pen stopped moving. The defendant's claim that Bright Flame deliberately targeted civilians is not supported to the standard required by law. The court rules in favor of the prosecution. The defendant is ordered to pay court costs. Case dismissed. The gavel came down, guilty. Not the hero. The victim, Ren Tanaka, made a sound. Small, broken. The sound of a man who had been told for the final time that the death of his wife didn't matter enough to inconvenience someone important. In the gallery, Bright Flame's smile came back, wider than before. He leaned back. He stretched his arm across the bench behind him. He looked directly at Izuku Midoriya, and he winked. The courtroom began to empty. Journalists filed, already writing their stories. The commission's lawyers shook hands. The prosecution looked relieved. Izuku Midoriya sat at the defense table. He didn't move. Ren Tanaka was saying something beside him. Something about appealing. Something about not giving up. The words entered Izuku's ears and dissolved before they reached meaning. He sat still. Something was happening inside him that he had felt once before. In another life, in another courtroom, in a moment where Hiromi Higuruma had looked at the scales of justice and watched them tip for the last time. Cursed energy. It didn't erupt. That would imply chaos. This was the opposite of chaos. This was pressure, immense, focused, silent, building from the core of his body outward. It filled his chest. It ran down his arms. It settled behind his eyes like a loaded weapon. The lights above the defense table flickered. The overhead fluorescence in the courtroom buzzed, then dimmed. A ballpoint pen on the prosecution table rolled off the edge and hit the floor. The air pressure dropped. Not dramatically, not visibly, but every person still in the room felt it. A sudden weight on the shoulders, a tightness in the chest, the instinctive, animal response of a body that sensed something wrong without knowing what. Judge Morimoto paused in the act of gathering his papers. He looked up. His hands were shaking. He didn't know why. Bright Flame's smile faded. He looked around the room. His hand twitched. An instinctive reach for his quirk, the way a soldier reaches for a weapon when the jungle goes quiet. Izuku stood up. Every eye in the room moved to him. He picked up his case file. He closed it. He set it on the table with a small, precise sound. Then he looked at Judge Morimoto. The judge met his eyes and immediately looked away. Not by choice, by reflex. The way prey averts its gaze from something that hasn't decided whether to eat it yet. Izuku turned his head. He looked at Bright Flame. The hero's fire quirk activated involuntarily, small flames dancing along his forearms. His body was responding to a threat his conscious mind couldn't identify. He looked at Izuku and saw a 17-year-old boy in a dark suit with green eyes, but something behind those eyes looked back at him, and it was much, much older. "This trial is a farce," Izuku said. His voice was quiet, controlled, barely above conversational. Every person in the courtroom heard it clearly, the way you hear a pin drop in a room that's gone completely silent. "I'll conduct my own." He turned away from the judge, away from Bright Flame, away from the gallery and the cameras and the legal system he had spent 2 years believing in. He placed his hand on Ren Tanaka's shoulder. "Go home to your children, Mr. Tanaka. I'll handle the rest." "Midoriya." "What?" But Izuku was already walking, down the aisle, through the gallery, out the doors. His footsteps echoed in the marble hallway, steady and even, the sound of someone who had just made a decision they would never unmake. The doors swung shut behind him. In the courtroom, the lights came back on. The air pressure normalized. Everyone exhaled breaths they didn't know they'd been holding. Judge Morimoto sat in his chair and stared at the space where Izuku Midoriya had been standing, and for reasons he would never be able to articulate, did not sleep well for the next 3 months. Izuku went home that evening. He cooked dinner for his mother. He washed the dishes. He told her he was going to be traveling for a while. Work-related, nothing dangerous. Inko looked at him the same way she had looked at him 2 years ago, the night he'd announced he was going to become a lawyer. That look. Like she was watching her son walk away from her in slow motion and couldn't figure out how to grab his sleeve. "Be safe," she said. "I will." He went to his room. He took off his suit. He stood in front of the mirror and looked at himself for a long time. Then he put on a different suit. Same color, same cut. But this one was looser, more rumpled. The shirt untucked at the back. The tie loosely knotted, hanging low. The sleeves rolled to the forearms. He looked at himself again. Hiromi Higuruma stared back. Izuku left through his bedroom window. He dropped 3 stories without a sound. Cursed energy cushioning the landing, and disappeared into the night. The defense attorney. That was the name that started circulating in underground channels within 2 weeks. Not a hero name, not a villain name, something else entirely. A category of 1. The first confirmed sighting was in the Kabukicho district. 3 members of a quirk trafficking ring. They kidnapped people with rare quirks and sold access to the black market for quirk-enhancing experiments, were found unconscious outside a police station, bound with zip ties. Each one had a folder on his chest. Legal documents, evidence, transaction records, enough to build a case that would hold in any court. The paperwork was immaculate. The binding was clean. The 3 men each had a single bruise. 1 on the jaw, 1 on the temple, 1 on the solar plexus. 3 hits, 3 targets, 3 folders, 3 complete evidentiary cases ready for prosecution. The police didn't know what to make of it. Vigilantism was illegal, but the evidence was real, and the 3 men were wanted in connection to disappearances going back 5 years. The cases went to court. All 3 were convicted. The second confirmed sighting was a week later. A pro-hero, rank 67, seismic-type quirk, who had been running a protection racket in Yokohama. Businesses in the hero's patrol area paid him directly to receive priority response. Those who didn't pay found that villain attacks in their area went unanswered for unusually long periods. The hero woke up in his own office. He was sitting in his desk chair, hands zip-tied behind him, a folder open on the desk in front of him. Financial records, bank statements, wire transfers, testimony from 17 business owners who had been paying him for 3 years, and a note. The note was handwritten, precise, almost calligraphic. This is your arraignment. The trial will be held when I decide. If you run, the sentence will be harsher. The hero ran. He made it 4 blocks before something hit him from behind and everything went dark. He woke up outside a police station with an even thicker folder on his chest and 2 broken ribs that hadn't been there before. The note on top of this folder was shorter. I told you. He was convicted within the month. The underground was talking. Villain networks that operated in the spaces heroes didn't patrol. The alleys and basements and back rooms where quirks were used for profit and pain started hearing a name they couldn't quite pin down. Some said it was a quirk user with an evidence-related ability. Some said it was a team. Some said it was a vigilante with connections inside the police. Nobody said it was a 17-year-old quirkless kid with an energy that didn't exist in this world's physics. And nobody said it was the same person who had just spent 2 years in courtrooms, winning cases and losing verdicts and learning exactly which parts of the system were broken enough to exploit from the other side. The defense attorney didn't just fight. That was what confused people. He wasn't a brawler who beat up criminals and left them for the cops. He built cases. Every takedown came with documentation. Every arrest by proxy included evidence chains so clean that prosecutors didn't even need to investigate further. Further, he was doing the legal system's job for it, from outside the system, using methods the system would never approve. It was infuriating, it was effective, and it was getting worse. 3 months in, the defense attorney shifted targets. He stopped going after street-level villains and started going after heroes. A rescue hero in Sendai who had been falsifying rescue counts to inflate his ranking. A combat hero in Sapporo who had been taking bribes from a construction company to ignore their safety violations. A sidekick agency in Osaka that was laundering money through a fake charity, each one taken down. Folder delivered. Evidence pristine. The heroes fought back, some of them with quirks that should have ended any confrontation instantly. It didn't matter. The defense attorney adapted to every quirk. He read attack patterns in real time. He hit harder than any quirkless person should have been able to hit. And when the fights got bad, really bad, the kind of bad where the hero stopped caring about collateral and started firing everything they had, something happened that nobody could explain. The attacks stopped working. Fire that should have burned him slid off his skin. Ice that should have frozen him cracked on contact. Telekinetic force that should have pinned him in place broke apart the moment it touched his body, like he was wrapped in something invisible that said no to every external power that tried to reach him. And heroes who survived encounters with the defense attorney described it differently, but the feeling was the same. It was like my quirk forgot how to work when he was close. Domain amplification. They just didn't know what to call it. The commission knew something was very wrong. They didn't know what. Their analysts reviewed footage from security cameras, from hero body cams, from civilian phone recordings. They saw a young man in a rumpled black suit moving at speeds that shouldn't have been possible. They saw a weapon, a dark, heavy tool that changed shape, that didn't match any registered quirk or support item. They saw heroes with powerful quirks lose to someone who, on paper, shouldn't have been able to survive the first exchange. The file with Izuku Midoriya's name on it was pulled from the archive. It was updated, recategorized. The new classification was one the commission used sparingly: extreme threat, priority neutralization. They weren't wrong. 4 months into Izuku's career as the defense attorney, the name Bright Flame came back across his desk. Not because Izuku went looking for him, because the trail led there. Every corrupt hero Izuku had taken down in the past month had connections to the same money. The same accounts, the same shadow network that moved funds between hero agencies, villain groups, and commissioned black sites with the precision of a Swiss watch. Izuku followed the money the way he followed arguments, relentlessly, systematically, with the patience of someone who knew the conclusion was already waiting at the end of the evidence chain. The money led to a syndicate. No public name, no registered presence. A ghost organization that had been operating for at least a decade, facilitating the kind of arrangements that made the hero system run. Heroes who looked the other way, villains who operated within acceptable boundaries, civilians who disappeared quietly when they saw too much. The syndicate's chief enforcer, the one who made problems go away when paperwork wasn't enough, was a pro-hero, Bright Flame. Izuku read the file. He read the transaction records, the communication logs, the list of resolved situations that stretched back years. He read the names of the civilians who had been silenced. Some were paid off, some were threatened, some were just gone. Vanished from public records. Addresses cleared, families told they'd moved overseas. He read the file on the building collapse in Shizuoka, the one that killed Ren Tanaka's wife. The 2 civilians who had been live streaming weren't random bystanders. They were informants. Commissioned whistleblowers who had been about to leak evidence of the syndicate's existence to an independent journalist. Bright Flame hadn't been responding to a villain attack. He'd been cleaning up a problem. The villain attack was staged. The collapse was intentional. 3 people died because they knew too much. Ren Tanaka's wife had been collateral damage. She'd just been standing in the wrong building. Izuku closed the file. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Mr. Tanaka? It's Midoriya. I found out what happened to your wife. Silence on the other end. Then, tell me, Izuku told him. All of it. The syndicate, the whistleblowers, the staged attack, the cover-up. Ren Tanaka listened. When Izuku finished, the line was quiet for a long time. What are you going to do? Ren asked. What I should have done in that courtroom, Izuku said. Hold a real trial. The warehouse was in the industrial district east of Musutafu. Decommissioned, off the grid, owned by a shell company that traced back to the syndicate through 6 layers of corporate obfuscation. Izuku had spent a week mapping it. Entry points, sight lines, structural weaknesses, escape routes. He knew where the guards were stationed. He knew their quirks. He knew their shift changes. He knew that Bright Flame used this warehouse as a meeting point for the syndicate's leadership once a month, the first Saturday after midnight. It was the first Saturday. It was after midnight. Izuku walked up to the front door, not the side entrance, not the roof access, the front door. He didn't crouch. He didn't sneak. He walked with his hands in his pockets and his tie loose, the way a man walks into his own office on a Tuesday morning. The first guard saw him coming and almost didn't react, because nothing about Izuku's body language said threat. He looked like a teenager who had gotten lost on the way home from a late shift. Then the guard saw his eyes, and the hesitation ended. Hey, stop, right? Izuku's hand came out of his pocket. The gavel materialized, dark, dense, humming with cursed energy. He swung it once, low, and caught the guard across the ribs. The man folded like a lawn chair. He hit the ground and didn't get back up. The door was locked. Izuku swung the gavel overhead and brought it down. The door didn't open. It ceased to exist. Metal fragments scattered across the warehouse floor like shrapnel inside. 20 people. Armed. Various quirks, Syndicate muscle, hired killers, a few off-duty sidekicks who supplemented their income with wet work. They were arranged around a central meeting area, crates and tables and maps and the kind of equipment that doesn't show up on legitimate procurement orders. And at the far end, standing on a raised platform like he was delivering a keynote address, Bright Flame full hero costume, cape and all. The fire along his arms was bright, and the smile on his face was brighter. "Well?" Bright Flame said, leaning forward. The quirkless lawyer, the defense attorney himself. "I have to say, Midoriya, I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to come here." "Yoshida Kenji." Izuku used his real name, not his hero name. "You're gonna stand trial tonight." A Bright Flame laughed. The sound bounced off the warehouse walls. 20 people laughed with him. "Trial?" Bright Flame spread his hands. Fire danced between his fingers. "Look around you, kid. You're quirkless. You're 17. You're alone. And there are 21 people in this building who would love to shut you up permanently." Izuku looked around the warehouse. He counted heads. He noted positions. He observed quirks activating. The crackle of electricity from one, the shifting of body mass from another, the metallic sheen of a hardening type on a third. 20 fighters plus Bright Flame. Various ranges, various threat levels. 3 had firearms, 2 had bladed support items. The rest relied on their quirks. Izuku rolled his neck. A small pop echoed in the sudden quiet. 21, he repeated. He shifted the gavel in his grip, extended the handle. The weapon stretched into a staff, 6 feet of dense, cursed energy, the head reforming into a balanced weight at the end. I was hoping for more. The first 3 came at him together. Electricity, hardening, and a speed type who could burst forward in short teleportation dashes. The speed type blinked in first, appearing behind Izuku with a knife aimed at his kidney. Izuku wasn't there. He'd already shifted 2 feet to the left, reading the micro-distortion in the air that preceded the teleportation. The knife hit empty space. Izuku's elbow hit the speed type's temple. The man dropped. The hardening type charged, skin like chrome, fists cocked. Izuku pivoted and swung the staff low, sweeping the man's legs. Chrome skin didn't help when your center of gravity was gone. The hardening type crashed onto his back. Izuku brought the staff down on his sternum like a pile driver. The chrome cracked. The man's eyes went white. The electricity user fired a bolt from 15 feet away. Blue, white, fast, 50,000 volts. Izuku held up his free hand. Domain amplification flared across his palm, invisible to the naked eye. But there, the bolt hit his hand and dissolved. The current didn't reach his body. The electricity user had time to think, wait, what, before the staff crossed the distance between them and caught him across the jaw. He spun twice and hit a stack of crates. 3 down. 3 seconds. The room went cold. Not temperature cold. Fear cold. Izuku didn't stop. He moved through the warehouse like something the room couldn't contain. The staff whirled and struck and swept, and every time it connected, someone stopped fighting. A fire breather launched a cone of flame. Izuku walked through it, domain amplification eating the heat off his skin, and cracked the staff across the man's collarbone. A telekinetic tried to pin him from above. The force hit Izuku's body and shattered like glass on stone. Izuku looked up, located the telekinetic on the catwalk, and threw the staff like a javelin. It caught him in the chest and launched him off the railing. He hit the ground hard. The staff returned to Izuku's hand. Cursed energy recall, a trick Higuruma had never needed but Izuku had refined during training, a woman with a blade extension quirk, her fingers elongated into razor-sharp metal, came at him from the right. Izuku reshaped the staff mid-swing, the head flaring wide into a hammer. The flat of the hammer caught her blades and snapped them. She screamed. Izuku's follow-up caught her in the ribs and sent her through a support beam. The beam cracked. The ceiling above groaned. "Stop him! All of you, stop him!" Bright Flame's voice had lost its composure. 7 came at once. A coordinated rush, or as coordinated as panicking criminals could manage. Bodies from every direction. Quirks firing wild. Izuku planted his feet. He reshaped the gavel back to standard form and held it in his right hand. His left hand curled into a fist, cursed energy concentrating along his knuckles until the air around them distorted like heat haze. The first to reach him took a gavel strike to the shoulder. The bone shattered. Izuku spun with the momentum and drove his left fist into the second attacker's solar plexus. The cursed energy amplified the blow by a factor that would have made kinesiologists weep. The man's feet left the ground. He flew backward 20 feet and embedded in the far wall, leaving a crater in the concrete. 3, 4, 5. Izuku moved between them like he was following choreography they couldn't hear. He ducked a crystalline quirk projectile, caught the shooter's wrist, and redirected the next crystal into the knee of the guy behind him. He hooked the gavel around a charging brute's ankle and yanked, flipping the man end over end. Before the brute landed, Izuku had already brought the gavel down on the next target's guard. Arms raised, defensive quirk active, and punched straight through it. The gavel hit meat. The man went limp. 6, 7. The last two of the rush tried to run. Izuku extended the gavel handle, spun it once overhead, and swept it in a wide arc. Both men caught it across the back and ate concrete. 15 down. The remaining 5 hesitated. They looked at the bodies on the ground. They looked at Izuku, standing in the center of the warehouse, barely breathing hard, the gavel resting on his shoulder. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loose. He had a single scratch on his forearm, a lucky hit from the Blade Woman that was already closing. Skin knitting together in real time. Reverse cursed technique, running passive in the background. The scratch sealed, not even a scar. The 5 looked at each other. 3 of them dropped their weapons and put their hands up. 2 tried to run for the side exit. Izuku didn't chase them. He shifted the gavel to a throwing grip, flicked it once, short, precise, a wrist motion that Higuruma had used to launch the gavel like a discus. It hit the first runner between the shoulder blades. He face-planted into the exit door. The gavel ricocheted off his back, spun in the air, and caught the second runner across the back of the head. He went down like a puppet with cut strings. The gavel arced back to Izuku's hand. Automatic recalled, 19 down. 1 remaining guard stood with his hands up, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Izuku looked at him. Leave. The man ran so fast he tripped over 2 unconscious bodies on his way out. 20 down. Izuku turned to the raised platform. Bright Flame stood alone. The smile was gone. The fire on his arms was burning hot, white hot. The kind of temperature that warped the air and made the metal platform beneath him glow. His eyes were wide. Not afraid, not yet, but calculating, reassessing. What are you? Bright Flame whispered. Izuku stepped over an unconscious body. Then another. He walked toward the platform. Each step was deliberate. I'm your defense attorney, Izuku said. Not that you'll need one. The evidence is overwhelming. Bright Flame attacked. The fire came in a wall, floor to ceiling, full width of the warehouse, hot enough to melt steel. It roared across the space between them with the sound of a jet engine. The kind of attack that leveled buildings and left nothing behind. Izuku didn't dodge. He walked into it. Domain amplification swallowed the fire at the boundary of his body. Flames broke around him like water around stone. Inside the fire, Izuku was untouched. His suit singed at the edges, but his skin was cool. He emerged from the other side of the inferno without breaking stride. Bright Flame fired again. Concentrated this time. A lance of white fire aimed directly at Izuku's chest. Izuku tilted his head. The lance passed his cheek close enough to feel the heat. The domain amplification was focused on his hands and torso, not a full-body coat. But Izuku had calculated the trajectory before the attack launched. He'd watched Bright Flame's shoulder rotation, his wrist angle, the flicker pattern of the flame as it gathered. He knew where the lance would go before Bright Flame did. The lance missed by 3 inches. Izuku closed the remaining distance in 2 steps and swung the gavel. Bright Flame raised a fire barrier, a solid wall of compressed flame between them. The gavel hit it and punched through. Fire scattered. The gavel's head connected with Bright Flame's raised forearm. Bone broke. The sound was sharp and clean, like a branch snapping. Bright Flame screamed and stumbled back. His broken arm hung wrong. Fire erupted from his body in all directions. A panic response, a full-body detonation meant to push back everything within 10 meters. Izuku reinforced his entire body with cursed energy and braced. The blast pushed him back 2 feet. His shoes scraped lines in the concrete floor. He stopped, planted, then he moved forward. Bright Flame threw fire with his good arm, wild now, unfocused, desperate. Izuku wove through it, not gracefully, not like a dancer, like a boxer cutting distance, efficient, ruthless. He closed to striking range and drove the gavel into Bright Flame's ribs. The hero lifted off his feet. He flew backward off the platform, over the meeting table and hit the warehouse's back wall. The wall cratered around him. He slid to the floor, gasping, ribs cracked, arm broken, fire guttering low on his skin. Izuku stepped up onto the platform. He looked down at Bright Flame. The hero looked up at him, blood on his teeth, defiance in his eyes. Even now, even broken. The arrogance was still there, the certainty that he was untouchable, that the system would save him, that it always had and always would. Izuku clasped his hands. The air changed. Domain expansion. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. The way a judge sounds when the verdict has already been decided and the courtroom is just a formality. Deadly sentencing. The warehouse disappeared. Not slowly, not dramatically. One moment. Cracked concrete, scattered bodies, the smell of burned metal. The next moment, gone. Replaced entirely by something that had no business existing in a world that ran on quirk physics. The courtroom. It was massive. The ceiling, if there was a ceiling, was so far above that it disappeared into a sky that was neither dark nor light. Just gray. Endless gray. The walls stretched in every direction, lined from floor to impossible height with guillotines. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Each one dormant, blade up, frame clean, waiting for a verdict that hadn't been delivered yet. Two podiums stood in the center of the space, facing each other across a floor of black stone. The stone was smooth and cold and absolute. Nothing grew here. Nothing breathed here. This was a space designed for one purpose, and that purpose was judgment. Izuku stood at one podium. He hadn't moved. The transition from warehouse to domain had been seamless. One reality folding into the next like a page turning. Bright Flame was at the other podium. He had been placed there by the domain itself, positioned with his hands on the wood, standing upright regardless of his broken arm and cracked ribs. Inside this space, the domain's rules were absolute. Bright Flame tried to move. His body snapped back to the podium. He tried to activate his quirk. Fire gathered on his fingertips. The fire died. He tried again. Nothing. What is this? My courtroom, Izuku said. Violence is prohibited here. That includes quirk activation for offensive purposes. Those are the rules. You'll follow them because you don't have a choice. Behind Izuku, something materialized. Judgment. The Shikigami rose from nothing. Massive, robed, its face hidden behind a blank expression that revealed nothing and judged everything. It hovered above and behind Izuku, scales in one hand, an open ledger in the other. Its robes drifted like smoke. Its presence filled the courtroom with something that had no name. Truth. Maybe. The absolute, inescapable, undeniable kind. Bright Flame stared at it, his mouth opened. No sound came out. The defendant is Yoshida Kenji, known publicly as the pro-hero Bright Flame, Izuku said. His voice echoed in the courtroom. Formal, measured, final. The charges are as follows. He didn't read from notes, he didn't need to. Judgment knew everything. Every act is every decision, every crime, every cover-up, every life destroyed. The Shikigami's ledger contained the defendant's complete truth, not what they admitted, not what they hid, but what actually happened. Count 1, 3 charges of first-degree murder. Victims, Hayashi Sora, Nakagawa Ren, and Tanaka Yuki. Killed on April 17th during a staged villain attack orchestrated by the defendant to eliminate commission whistleblowers. The structural collapse was intentional. The defendant aimed his quirk at a load-bearing wall with full knowledge that civilians were positioned behind it. Bright Flame's face went white, not from the injuries, from hearing the truth spoken aloud in a room where lies had no power. Count 2, 15 charges of accessory to murder, covering up the disappearance and presumed death of 15 civilians who possessed knowledge of the syndicate's operations, evidence of direct involvement in 6 of these cases. Count 3, 27 charges of corruption and abuse of authority, accepting payments from a criminal syndicate in exchange for providing enforcement, intimidation, and evidence destruction. Count 4, obstruction of justice, direct involvement in the manipulation of the Tanaka v. the People trial, including the bribery of Judge Morimoto and the tampering of structural evidence submitted to the Commission's investigative team. Izuku paused. The courtroom was silent. The guillotines waited. How do you plead? Bright Flame's mouth worked. His eyes darted to judgment, to the guillotines, to the empty courtroom that had no exits, no witnesses, no commission lawyers rushing in with motions to dismiss. This isn't real, Bright Flame said. This is some kind of quirk. You said you were quirkless. This is a trick, some kind of... How do you plead? Izuku repeated. Same tone, same weight. Bright Flame gripped the podium. His good hand was shaking. Not guilty. Judgment's ledger opened. The trial began. It wasn't a long trial. The evidence was absolute. Judgment didn't rely on testimony or forensics or the kind of evidence that could be manipulated by human hands. It relied on truth. Objective, irrefutable, cosmic truth. Every crime Bright Flame had committed played out in the space above the courtroom like a projection, not video, not memory, but reality itself being replayed. The warehouse meeting where he agreed to the hit, the fire blast aimed at the east wall, the phone call to Judge Morimoto, the envelope of cash passed under a restaurant table. Bright Flame watched his own crimes play back and couldn't speak. His mouth was open, but his voice was gone. He looked like a man watching his own autopsy. The evidence speaks for itself, Izuku said. Judgment will now deliberate. Judgment's scales shifted. One side dropped. The other rose, guilty. The word didn't echo. It settled, like sediment hitting the bottom of a river. Final, permanent. Sentence, confiscation. Bright Flame gasped. Something left his body, visible for just a moment, a shimmer in the air around him, a twisting distortion that pulled and snapped and disappeared into Judgment's scales. His quirk, his fire. The thing that had defined him since childhood, that had made him a hero, that had given him the power to kill 3 people and smile about it afterward. Gone. Bright Flame reached for the flames instinctively. Nothing came. His hands were just hands. His body was just a body. He looked at his palms like he'd never seen them before. No, he whispered. No, no, no. Sentence, death penalty. The gavel in Izuku's hand dissolved. In its place, a new weapon formed. Longer, thinner. A blade, not a blunt instrument. The executioner's sword, a weapon made of pure cursed energy, its edge humming with a frequency that seemed to cut the air itself. It didn't glow. It absorbed light. It was the darkest thing in the courtroom, and the courtroom was already a place where light came to die. Bright Flame saw the blade and something broke behind his eyes. Wait, he said. Wait, please, I'll confess. I'll confess to everything. I'll testify against the syndicate. I'll give you names. The trial is over, Izuku said. The domain collapsed, reality rushed back. The warehouse, the concrete, the unconscious bodies, the smell of burned metal and blood. Bright Flame stood in the center of the warehouse, broken and quirkless, staring at Izuku Midoriya, who held a sword that shouldn't exist in one hand. Bright Flame reached for his fire one more time. Instinct, reflex, hope, nothing. Izuku stepped forward. Tanaka Yuki, Izuku said. Hayashi Sora, Nakagawa Ren, you killed them. You smiled about it. You winked at their husband in open court. The executioner's sword caught the light. Sentence carried out. One cut. Clean. Final. Bright Flame dropped. Izuku stood over the body for a moment. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt the scales adjust. One small increment, one small correction in a system that was still massively, catastrophically broken. He picked up the case file he'd brought. He placed it on the body. Every piece of evidence, every document, every transaction record, every name. Then he walked out of the warehouse into the cold night air and disappeared. By morning, the story was everywhere, not the full story. Nobody had the full story except Izuku. But the pieces were enough. Bright Flame, ranked 32nd pro hero, media darling, fan favorite, was dead. Found in an abandoned warehouse surrounded by 20 unconscious members of a criminal syndicate that nobody had known existed. On his body, a case file containing evidence of murder, corruption, and conspiracy that connected him to a shadow network operating within the hero system. The evidence was clean, airtight, undeniable. The kind of documentation that spoke for itself. The police investigated. They confirmed the evidence. The commission tried to seal the case. Standard procedure, hero-involved incident, national security concerns. But the file had already been photographed and uploaded to 3 independent news outlets by an anonymous source before the police even arrived. It was out. It was everywhere. And it couldn't be put back in. The public reaction was earthquake level. Bright Flame had been beloved. Action figures, fan clubs, morning talk show appearances. He'd rescued a bus full of children on live television 6 months ago. The footage had gotten 40 million views. Parents named their kids after him. And now, evidence that he was a murderer working for a criminal syndicate. The internet split in half. Fan communities imploded. Hero forums went to war. Some people refused to believe it. Some people believed it immediately and started pulling at every other hero's record, looking for cracks. The commission's credibility, already strained by years of quiet cover-ups that Izuku's earlier legal career had begun to expose, took a hit it couldn't recover from. 3 commission officials resigned within the week. 4 more were placed on administrative leave. An internal investigation was announced, then quietly downgraded, then very loudly upgraded again after the independent press wouldn't stop asking questions. And in the middle of all of it, one name kept coming up. Not in the official reports. Not on the news. In the quiet places, the underground forums, the villain channels. The late-night conversations between heroes who were starting to wonder if the system they served was worth serving. The defense attorney, nobody knew who he was, nobody knew how he operated, but everybody knew what he'd done. He'd killed a ranked pro-hero, he'd dismantled a syndicate. He'd delivered evidence so clean that the legal system couldn't ignore it, even though the legal system desperately wanted to. And he was still out there. Izuku didn't slow down. Over the next 8 months, the defense attorney became the most feared name in En's hero underground. He operated with a precision that bordered on supernatural, because it literally was. His targets were never random. Every takedown was researched, documented, and executed with the methodical patience of a prosecutor building a case for trial, because that's exactly what it was. Every corrupt hero, every dirty commission liaison, every connected villain was investigated, their crimes cataloged, their defenses mapped, and then he came for them. A hero in Kyoto who had been selling classified villain intelligence to black market brokers. Izuku caught him during a handoff, dismantled his teleportation quirk with domain amplification, and put him down in under a minute. Folder on his chest. Evidence to the police. Arrested the next day, a commission handler who had been blackmailing heroes into compliance using personal secrets. Izuku found him in a secure office on the 14th floor of a commission building. How he got in, nobody could figure out. The building's security system showed no breach, no entry, nothing. The handler woke up zip-tied to his office chair with a folder on his desk and a message. Your security is inadequate. So is your judgment. A trio of heroes in Nagoya running a fight ring. Underground quirk combat, forced participants, betting pools that moved millions. Izuku walked into the ring during a match in front of 300 spectators and shut the whole thing down single-handed. The 3 heroes fought him simultaneously. They lasted 90 seconds combined. The spectators watched a young man in a black suit disassemble 3 pro heroes with a weapon that changed shape and strikes that broke through quirk defenses like they were made of paper. Half the spectators fled. The other half sat in their seats, frozen, watching something they couldn't explain and would never forget. The pattern was always the same. Investigate, document, confront, dominate, deliver the evidence, disappear. Izuku never got caught. He never got identified by authorities. The commission had a task force dedicated to finding the defense attorney, and the task force had produced exactly 0 actionable leads. Every time they thought they were close, a security camera angle, a witness description, a pattern of movement, the trail went cold. He was a ghost, a rumor. A verdict that came in the night and left before dawn, but he was also, slowly, something else, tired. Not physically. Cursed energy kept his body running at peak efficiency. Reverse cursed technique healed whatever damage accumulated. He could fight 20 people and walk home without limping. The tiredness was deeper than that. Every night he went out. Every night he found corruption. Every night he put someone down, delivered a folder, disappeared. And every morning, the system was still standing, still broken, still churning out the same compromises and cover-ups and quiet injustices that it had been producing since before he was born. He was bailing water from a sinking ship with a teacup. He knew it. He'd known it from the start. Higuruma had known it too, had felt this same erosion, this same slow hollowing, the day-by-day dimming of something that used to burn bright. Higuruma had fought for justice until the system turned him into something that operated outside of it, and then he'd fought outside the system until the fighting was all he had left. Izuku was walking the same road, and he could see where it ended. Not with victory. Not with change. With a young man in a rumpled suit standing over another body, delivering another folder, and feeling nothing. He tried not to think about it. He had work to do. People to hold accountable. cases to try. But late at night, alone on a rooftop between targets, Izuku Midoriya sometimes caught himself staring at the Musutafu skyline and trying to remember why he had started this. The answer was always the same: because the courtroom failed. The question he couldn't answer was harder. Was this any different? 1 year and 2 months after the night in the warehouse, the commission made its move. Not with police, not with a task force, not with paperwork or warrants or any of the institutional tools they had been fumbling with for the past year. They sent heroes, 2 of them, the best they had. Mirio Tagada, hero name Lemillion, was 20 years old, a graduate of UA high school's hero course, holder of the permeation quirk, and one of the most purely good human beings the hero system had ever produced. He could phase through solid matter, make himself untouchable, move through walls and floors and attacks with a speed and precision that made him functionally impossible to fight. He had been Sir Night Eye's protege. He had fought Overhaul. He had lost his quirk, gotten it back, and kept smiling through all of it. He smiled because he believed in what he did. Not in the system, not in the commission, in the mission, saving people, all of them, as many as he could, 1 million people. That was the number he'd chosen. That was the promise he'd made. The commission told him the defense attorney was a dangerous vigilante responsible for multiple hero deaths. They showed him the file. They showed him the evidence, selectively curated evidence that emphasized the violence and omitted the context. They told him the target was likely a powerful quirk user posing as Quirkless. They told him the target needed to be stopped before more heroes died. Mirio listened. He asked questions. He read the file twice. "I'll bring him in," Mirio said. "Alive." The commission didn't argue. They didn't expect alive to be an option, but they weren't going to say that to Lemillion's face. Tamaki Amajiki, hero name Suniter, was Mirio's partner. Same age, same graduating class. Manifest type quirk, he could consume biological matter and transform parts of his body to match it. Octopus tentacles, crab shells, bird wings, venomous spines. The range was as vast as his diet. He was one of UA's big 3 for a reason. Where Mirio was raw speed and phasing, Tamaki was adaptability and overwhelming offensive variety. Tamaki didn't smile the way Mirio did. Tamaki was anxious, quiet, the kind of person who stood behind Mirio's light and was content there. But in a fight, Tamaki Amajiki was a nightmare. Multiple simultaneous transformations, overlapping attack types, biological weaponry that shifted faster than most people could track, 2 of the most talented young heroes alive. The commission sent them both. It wasn't enough, but nobody knew that yet. Rain. Tokyo rain, November rain, the kind that doesn't fall so much as descend. A gray curtain that turns streetlights into smears and empties the roads of everyone with enough sense to be indoors. Izuku was on a rooftop in the Shinjuku district. He'd just finished a reconnaissance pass on a commission safe house that he suspected was being used to house evidence from buried hero misconduct cases. The safe house could wait. His notes were complete. He was about to leave. 2 figures landed on the opposite end of the rooftop. Izuku stopped. He turned slowly. Mirio Tagada stood in the rain with his hero costume clinging to his frame and his blonde hair plastered flat. He was smiling. Not the media smile. Something smaller, more honest. The smile of someone who genuinely hoped this was going to end without a fight. Behind him and to the left, Tamaki Amajiki stood with his hood up, hands in the pockets of his hero cloak, eyes fixed on Izuku with the focus of someone who had already processed 16 attack options and was running through a 17th. Izuku looked at them. He recognized both immediately. UA graduates, Big 3, Lemillion and Suniter, top-tier combatants, clean records, no corruption flags. He'd checked. These weren't dirty heroes. These were the real thing. That made this harder. "You're the defense attorney," Mirio said. "Not a question. And you're Lemillion." Izuku's voice was flat. "The commission sent you." "They did. But I'm not here for the commission. I'm here because people are dying and I want to understand why." "People were dying before I started," Izuku said. "The commission just didn't care about those people." "That might be true. I'd like to hear your side. Can we talk?" Izuku studied Mirio's face. Rain ran down both of them. The rooftop was slick and cold and empty. "No," Izuku said. "Because talking is what I did for 2 years, and the system answered by burying my cases and protecting murderers. I'm done talking." Mirio's smile dimmed, not gone, just Sadder. Then I have to bring you in. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Izuku's hand opened at his side. The gavel materialized, rain hissing where it hit the cursed energy surface. I respect what you are, Togata, but you're standing between me and the people who built this rotten system. You blindly serve a broken scale. Get out of my way. I can't do that. I know. Izuku shifted his weight forward. Mirio's smile firmed. Tamaki's hands came out of his pockets, already shifting, his right arm thickening into a crab claw the size of a motorcycle engine, his left splitting into octopus tentacles tipped with venomous barbs. The rain fell. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. It felt like an hour. Then Mirio phased. Permeation was one of the most annoying quirks to fight. Mirio's body turned intangible. He passed through the rooftop surface, through the building, through physical reality itself. He moved underground, or through the ground, technically, and erupted from the concrete directly beneath Izuku's feet. His fist came up solid, aimed at Izuku's jaw. Maximum speed. Maximum commitment. The full force of a man who had been training with this quirk since high school and knew exactly how to weaponize the transition between intangible and solid. Izuku wasn't there. The moment Mirio had phased, Izuku had read it. The permeation quirk required Mirio to become solid to attack. That transition, from intangible to tangible, took a fraction of a second. During that fraction, Mirio's body had to occupy physical space, which meant vibration, displacement, a micro shift in the surface beneath Izuku's feet that a normal person would never feel. Izuku felt it. Higuruma's combat instincts had been superhuman. The man had adapted to Yuji Itadori's speed in the middle of a deathmatch. Izuku's body responded before his conscious mind caught up. His feet shifted 4 inches to the left. Mirio's fist came up through the space where his jaw had been. Empty air. Izuku pivoted and swung the gavel down. Mirio was already phasing again. The fist that had missed went intangible before the gavel could connect. The weapon passed through him. Mirio sank back into the ground and repositioned. Fast, Izuku murmured. Mirio erupted again. Behind Izuku this time, a spinning kick aimed at the back of his head. Izuku dropped low. The kick whistled overhead. He spun on his heel and drove the gavel into the space where Mirio's midsection would be when he landed. Mirio phased mid-landing. The gavel went through him again. This was the problem. Mirio could attack and phase almost simultaneously. The window between solid and intangible was tiny. Hitting him required predicting not just where he'd be, but when he'd be solid, Izuku processed. He watched Mirio surface and submerge 3 more times, each attack coming from a different angle. He tracked the pattern, the timing, the rhythm of Mirio's quirk activation. There was a rhythm. There always was. Human bodies had limits, even superhuman ones. Mirio had to breathe. He had to see. Every time he surfaced to attack, he needed a fraction of a second with his eyes solid to locate his target. That fraction was his vulnerability. Izuku counted, timed, measured. Mirio burst from the ground to Izuku's right, fist cocked. Izuku was already swinging. The gavel connected, square in the chest, the full force of cursed energy reinforcement behind it. Mirio hadn't finished solidifying when the hit landed. He was caught in the transition, half-phased, body trying to decide whether to be real or not. The cursed energy decided for him. Mirio flew backward. 15 feet. 20. He hit the rooftop's raised edge and cracked it, concrete crumbling around his shoulders. He gasped. The wind was gone from his lungs. His ribs screamed, but he was standing before Izuku could close the distance. Feet planted, smile intact, bloodied, bruised, already moving. "That's the hardest anyone's hit me since Overhaul," Mirio said, wiping blood from his lip. "What is that weapon?" "Judgment," Izuku said. Tamaki moved. While Mirio had been engaging Izuku head-on, Tamaki had been circling, positioning. His body had shifted, octopus tentacles from his left arm, a massive crab claw on his right, and from his back, 3 crystalline wings that hadn't been there before. Some kind of insect chitin, maybe dragonfly. The wings beat once and launched him forward at an angle Izuku wasn't covering. Tentacles first. 8 of them, each one thick as a forearm, lashing toward Izuku from 6 different vectors. They came fast. They came from angles that a human body shouldn't have been able to generate attacks from. Izuku extended the gavel into a staff and spun it. The rotation was tight, precise, creating a defensive circle that intercepted the tentacles before they could reach him. 2 were batted away. 3 were deflected. one wrapped around the staff's midsection. Tamaki's grip was incredible. The suction force of an octopus amplified by human-scale musculature. The tentacle tried to yank the staff from Izuku's hands. Izuku yanked back. Tamaki came with it, pulled off balance, dragged forward by his own grip. Izuku met him mid-flight with a cursed energy-reinforced knee to the solar plexus. The impact was devastating. Tamaki folded around Izuku's knee, spit flying, eyes bulging. The tentacles went limp for a moment. Just a moment. But a moment was all Izuku needed. He reshuffled the gavel to hammer form and brought it down on Tamaki's back. The hero hit the rooftop face first. Concrete cracked in a spiderweb beneath him. But Tamaki was tough. The Big Three didn't earn the title through talent alone. His body shifted even as he was being driven into the ground. The crab claw came up and caught the hammer before a second blow could land. The claw was dense, reinforced chitin, strong enough to stop the gavel cold. For a moment, Izuku poured more cursed energy into the strike. The claw cracked, then shattered. Tamaki screamed and rolled away, his right arm shifting rapidly, crab to mantis shrimp to something. Layers of biological armor stacking on top of each other. Mirio phased in behind Izuku. Another strike. This time, Izuku was occupied with Tamaki and couldn't fully dodge. Mirio's fist caught him on the shoulder. The hit was heavy. Izuku's body shifted sideways, but the cursed energy reinforcement absorbed the majority of the impact. What should have dislocated his shoulder was instead a hard shove that Izuku used to redirect his momentum, spinning away from both opponents, creating distance, resetting. He landed 10 feet away. Staff in hand, rain dripping from his hair, Mirio was breathing hard. Tamaki was on one knee, arm rebuilding, eyes focused. 2-on-1. Two of the best young heroes in Japan. Against a single opponent who looked like he'd barely started warming up. "He's not using a quirk," Tamaki said quietly, staring at Izuku. "I can feel it. It's something else, something I've never encountered." "I noticed," Mirio said. "My permeation didn't work like it should. When his weapon went through me, I felt something, like static, like it almost caught." They were right. Domain amplification, when concentrated through the gavel, could interfere with quirk effects at the point of contact. Izuku hadn't fully neutralized permeation. The quirk was too deeply integrated into Mirio's physiology for a surface-level negation, but he disrupted it enough to create openings. Against most fighters, that disruption wouldn't matter. Against Izuku, it was a death sentence. "Last chance," Izuku said. "Walk away." Mirio shook his head. Tamaki stood up. They came at him together. This is the part of the fight where Izuku stopped holding back. He activated domain amplification fully. His body shimmered. Not visibly, not to the naked eye, but the rain hitting his skin started behaving differently. Droplets that touched him slowed, split. Evaporated not from heat, but from the sheer density of the energy field wrapped around his body. He was encased in his domain's aura, and everything that touched him was subject to its rules. Tamaki came in first. Full Chimera mode, tentacles, crab legs from his back for stability, mantis shrimp claws that could strike with enough force to crack bulletproof glass. He unleashed a barrage. Fast. Varied. Hitting from every angle simultaneously, Izuku parried with the staff. Every strike, the mantis shrimp blows, the fastest biological strike mechanism on the planet, came in at speeds that should have been unblockable. Izuku's staff was there. Every time. The cursed energy coating on the weapon neutralized the kinetic enhancement of Tamaki's biological forms on contact. The hits landed but lost their teeth. What should have shattered Izuku's guard became manageable blocks that he redirected into openings. He slapped a tentacle aside and stepped in. Tamaki's chest was open. Izuku drove the butt of the staff into Tamaki's sternum. The hit launched him backward. Tamaki's biological armor absorbed some of it. He'd layered crab shell over his torso. But the cursed energy punched through the armor's quirk factor, cracking the shell and bruising what was beneath. Tamaki hit the ground hard but rolled, already shifting again. Wings out, airborne. He pulled altitude, trying to get above Izuku where range advantage would matter. Izuku didn't let him. He reshaped the staff mid-throw. The head flared into a hook, the handle compressed, and he launched it like a harpoon. The hook caught Tamaki's ankle. Izuku yanked. Tamaki came down fast and hard, slamming into the rooftop with a crack that split concrete. The gavel recalled. Back in Izuku's hand before Tamaki had finished bouncing, Mirio came in from below. through the rooftop. Fist first. Izuku felt the vibration a tenth of a second before the attack arrived. He stomped. Cursed energy flowed from his foot into the concrete. A pulse, dense and sharp, that disrupted the surface Mirio was phasing through. It was like hitting water with a depth charge. Mirio's body stuttered. The phasing flickered. For an instant, a quarter of a second, he was stuck. Half solid, half phased, his body locked between states. Izuku grabbed him by the face. His fingers closed around Mirio's head with a grip reinforced by cursed energy. He lifted the hero out of the concrete like pulling a weed and slammed him into the rooftop. Crack. Then again. Crack. Mirio hit the ground twice and bounced. His quirk flared, trying to phase him free, but Izuku's domain amplification was running through his grip, suppressing the permeation at the contact point. Mirio couldn't phase the parts of his body that Izuku was touching. Izuku released him and drove a knee into his ribs. Then a follow-up, the gavel, reshaped to standard form, brought down on Mirio's shoulder. The hit separated something. Mirio yelled. The sound was sharp and real, and the first time Izuku had heard genuine pain from him. Izuku stepped back. Mirio was on the ground. Tamaki was down 20 feet away, trying to get his legs under him with one arm that wouldn't shift right and ribs that were definitely cracked. It was over. It had been over since the fight started. They just hadn't known it, but Izuku didn't finish it. He stood in the rain, gavel at his side, and looked at the two heroes on the ground. Mirio was bleeding from a cut above his eye. His shoulder was wrong. His breathing was ragged, and he was getting up, slowly, painfully. Feet scraping on wet concrete, hands pushing against the ground, body shaking with the effort of overriding what his injuries were telling him. Mirio stood, barely, one arm hanging limp, blood mixing with rain on his face. He raised his fists. Izuku stared at him. Tagata, stay down. Can't. Mirio's smile was still there, smaller, thinner, but there. There are people behind me, people who need heroes who won't give up. If I go down standing. You can't beat me. Probably not. I've neutralized your quirk at contact range. Your partner is down. You have a separated shoulder and at least 3 cracked ribs. Yeah. Mirio swayed slightly, steadied. So, Izuku looked at him. Rain fell between them. The city hummed below. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Why? Izuku asked, genuinely asked. The first honest question he'd spoken in months. Mirio's smile widened. Just a fraction. Because someone has to. And I decided a long time ago that someone was going to be me. Izuku's hand tightened on the gavel, then he clasped his hands. Domain expansion, deadly sentencing. The rooftop vanished. The courtroom assembled itself around them. Massive, silent. The guillotines lining every wall, blades gleaming in light that came from nowhere. The black stone floor, the gray sky above. The 2 podiums facing each other, heavy and final. Izuku stood at his podium. Mirio was at the other, placed there by the domain's mechanics. His injuries remained. The domain didn't heal, and it didn't harm. It just judged. Tamaki was inside the domain too, brought in by the expansion, placed at the periphery. He sat on the cold floor, barely conscious, watching through half-closed eyes. Judgment materialized behind Izuku. Robes drifting, scales balanced, ledger open. Mirio looked around the courtroom. He didn't panic. He didn't try to fight. He looked at the guillotines, at the podiums, at Judgment, and then at Izuku. This is your power, Mirio said. This is my law. Izuku opened the trial. The defendant is Mirio Tagata, known publicly as the pro-hero Lemillion. The charge is, he paused. Judgment's ledger was open. Izuku looked at it. In every previous trial, the charges had been clear. Corruption, murder, abuse of power. The ledger presented crimes that were obvious and damning. Mirio's ledger was different. There were infractions, minor ones. Vigilante-adjacent actions taken during the overhaul raid that technically violated jurisdictional boundaries. Property damage during hero operations that hadn't been fully reported. A protocol violation during a commission briefing where Mirio had shared classified information with a civilian to save a life. Small things, the kind of things that exist in every hero's record, because the hero system was built on impossible standards and nobody got through it clean. The charge is vigilante endangerment, Izuku said slowly, minor jurisdictional violation during the Shi Hasaikai operation. It was the most serious charge Judgment could find. Izuku felt something shift in his chest, a crack in something he'd built very carefully over the past year. the wall between what he was doing and what he used to believe. Judgment's trial proceeded. And unlike every previous trial, this one showed Izuku something he hadn't expected. It showed him Mirio. Everything. Every memory. Every moment. A young boy with a quirk he couldn't control, phasing through floors and walls in his own bed, scared, confused, told by everyone around him that his power was useless, that he'd never be a hero. Sound familiar? A teenager who trained until his body broke, mastering a quirk that required perfect full-body coordination by practicing the same movements 10,000 times, 20,000, 100,000, until the phasing was as natural as breathing. Not because he was gifted, because he refused to stop. A young man who smiled through everything, through the training that broke him, through the doubt that surrounded him, through the loss of Sir Night-Eye, through the loss of his quirk in the overhaul raid, willingly, deliberately giving up his power to save a little girl he barely knew because the alternative was watching her suffer, through getting his quirk back, and not wasting a single day of the second chance. Izuku watched it all. Every frame, every moment. He saw a boy who had been told he couldn't be a hero, who had been told his power was worthless, who had been dismissed and overlooked and written off, and who had become one anyway, through nothing but will and work and the stubborn, unbreakable belief that saving people was worth any cost. Izuku's hands were shaking. He knew this story. He had lived this story. A different version. A darker version. But the starting point was the same. A boy who was told he wasn't enough and decided the world was wrong. Mirio had made the same decision and chosen a different path. Not the law, not the sword, the smile, the hand reaching out, the body between danger and the innocent. And unlike Izuku, Mirio had never stopped believing in it. Judgment delivered the verdict. Guilty. Confiscation. Minor, the sentence was automatic. Izuku couldn't override Judgment's mechanics. Once a trial began, it followed its own logic. Guilty was guilty, regardless of scale. Mirio's quirk was taken, the shimmer left his body. Permeation? Gone. Just like that. Mirio gasped, his knees buckled slightly. He caught himself on the podium, but he didn't fall. The domain collapsed. Rain hit Izuku's face. The rooftop was back. Reality was back. Everything was cold and wet and real. Mirio stood in the rain, quirkless, again. For the second time in his life, his power had been ripped away by someone else's decision. He should have been broken. He should have been on his knees. He raised his fists. "All right," Mirio said. His voice was hoarse. His body was battered. His quirk was gone. "Let's keep going." Behind him, Tamaki had dragged himself upright, one arm wrapped around his own ribs, blood on his chin. He couldn't transform anymore. His body was too damaged for his quirk to engage properly. He stood beside Mirio anyway, shoulder to shoulder. Two heroes with nothing left, ready to die standing. Izuku looked at them. He looked at Mirio's raised fists, empty fists, quirkless fists. The fists of a man who had already lost this power once and earned it back and was losing it again and was still standing. Something broke inside Izuku Midoriya. Not like the courtroom, not rage, not cold fury, something older than that. Smaller, buried under a year of blood and verdicts and the slow erosion of everything he used to be. A memory. Not Higuruma's, his own. A 4-year-old boy watching All Might on a screen, tears running down his face, pointing at the TV and saying, "He's saving people with a smile." A 9-year-old boy writing in a notebook, analyzing hero techniques, dreaming of the day he could help, could reach out, could be the person who stood between danger and the innocent. A 14-year-old boy on a rooftop watching his dream die and choosing to build something new from the ashes. And now an 18-year-old man standing in the rain with blood on his hands and a weapon made of judgment, looking at the physical embodiment of everything he used to believe in. Mirio Togata was Izuku's dream, the uncorrupted version, the one the world tried to destroy and couldn't, just like Yuji Itadori. Izuku had known Itadori through Higuruma's memories, through the brief, brilliant, devastating partnership that had ended in sacrifice and fire. Itadori had been the same. That same impossible light, the same refusal to let the darkness win. The kind of person the world threw into a meat grinder, and somehow, impossibly, they came out the other side still reaching for someone who needed help. Mirio was that person. In this world. In this life. And Izuku had just taken his quirk. The gavel was raised. Izuku looked at it. Rainwater ran down the dark surface. Cursed energy hummed. He let it go. The gavel dissolved into nothing. Rain fell through the space where it had been. Izuku's hands fell to his sides. His shoulders dropped, not defeat. Something harder than defeat. Something that took more strength than any fight he'd ever won. Acceptance. "The law is flawed," Izuku said. His voice was quiet. The rain almost swallowed it, but Mirio heard every word. "The system that was supposed to protect the innocent is rotten from the inside. Judges bought with commission money. Heroes who kill and smile about it. Civilians ground into dust because they don't have the power to fight back." He paused. "But executing the blind doesn't fix the scales." Mirio lowered his fists, slowly. Not because the threat was gone, because he heard something in Izuku's voice that he recognized. Something real, something human. "I've been killing symptoms," Izuku said. "Taking down corrupt heroes one by one, delivering folders, walking away, and the machine keeps running. It keeps producing the same poison. Because I've been attacking the limbs instead of the head." He turned his back to them, faced the city. The lights of Musutafu glittered through the rain, blurred and distant. "Tell your commission I'm done hunting pawns," Izuku said over his shoulder. "The corruption isn't random, it's designed. Someone built this system to work this way. Someone at the top benefits from every buried case, every silenced witness, every hero who sells their soul for a ranking." He started walking toward the edge of the rooftop. "Court's adjourned until I find the ones pulling the strings." "Wait," Mirio said. Izuku stopped. He didn't turn around. "Your quirk will come back," Izuku said. "Confiscation on a minor charge is temporary. Give it a day, maybe 2. Silence. Then, "That's not what I was going to ask." Mirio's voice was strained but steady. "I was going to ask your name, your real name." Izuku stood at the edge of the rooftop. Rain streamed down his face, plastering his dark hair to his forehead, soaking his rumpled suit until it hung heavy on his frame. "Izuku Midoriya," he said. "Defense attorney. Licensed. Retired." He stepped off the edge. Mirio lunged forward, instincts firing, hand outstretched, but Izuku dropped 3 stories, cursed energy cushioning the fall, and hit the alley floor without a sound. By the time Mirio reached the edge and looked down, the alley was empty. Mirio stood there for a long time, rain pouring down, quirkless, beaten, the taste of blood in his mouth. "Mirio," Tamaki said from behind him, barely standing. "Are you okay?" Mirio was silent for a moment. Then he laughed. Soft, almost broken, almost beautiful. "That kid is the most dangerous person I've ever met," he said, "and I think he might also be the best person I've ever met. He took your quirk. It'll come back. You heard him." Mirio turned away from the edge. His face was a mess. Blood and rain and something else. Something in his eyes that looked like the beginning of an idea. "Tamaki, he said the system is rotten from the top." "Yeah. What if he's right?" Tamaki looked at his friend, at the hero who had lost his power and was already thinking about what came next. At the man who had just been beaten by something he couldn't explain and whose first thought was not revenge but truth. "Then we have a problem bigger than one vigilante," Tamaki said. Mirio nodded. His smile came back. Dim, tired, real. "Yeah, we do." Far below, in the dark streets of Musutafu, Izuku Midoriya walked. His suit was soaked. His tie hung loose. His knuckles were bruised. Reverse curse technique had healed the cuts, but left the purple because he hadn't bothered to fix what didn't matter. He walked without direction, through alleys that smelled like rain and garbage, past storefronts locked for the night. Under bridges where the homeless slept and the quirkless hid and the people the hero system forgot tried to survive another day. He walked and he thought. He thought about Mirio Togata standing in the rain with no quirk and no chance and his fists raised anyway. He thought about Yuji Itadori doing the same thing in a different world, in a different life. He thought about a 4-year-old boy who wanted to save people. He thought about a courtroom, a gavel falling. The word guilty, the beginning of the end. And he thought about what came next, because somewhere out there, beyond the commission, beyond the syndicates, beyond the corrupt heroes and the buried cases and the beautiful, rotting architecture of the hero system, something worse was moving. Izuku had been following the threads for months. The money trails that didn't end at the commission, the power structures that didn't fit the hero system's hierarchy. The shadows behind the shadows, all for one. The name surfaced in Higuruma's memories like a case file left open on a desk, a being who had lived for over a century. who had accumulated quirks the way tyrants accumulated power, by taking them from others, who had built and dismantled empires from the darkness, always behind the throne, always pulling the strings, and his successor, Tamura Shigaraki. A broken young man being reshaped into a weapon of mass destruction. Izuku knew about them. He'd known for a while. The deeper he dug into the hero system's corruption, the more often those two names had appeared at the bottom of the excavation. Not directly connected, but felt. The way you feel an earthquake's epicenter. Distant, deep, the source of all the tremors on the surface. The commission wasn't the disease. The commission was a symptom. A tumor on a body that was already sick. The real corruption was older, deeper, structural, and the entities waiting in the dark were going to exploit every crack. Izuku stopped walking. He stood in the middle of an empty street. Rain hammered the pavement around him. The city lights blurred and ran. For the first time in a year, Izuku Midoriya felt clear. Not happy. Not hopeful. Clear. The way a lens feels after you wipe it. The world was sharp again. The angles were visible. The path was not easy. It might have been the hardest path he'd ever seen. But it was there. He couldn't fix the system by destroying it piece by piece. Higuruma had tried that. Higuruma had died trying that. And the system had outlived him the same way it always outlived its critics. But Izuku wasn't Higuruma. Not entirely. He was also a boy who had been born in a world of heroes and had grown up believing, genuinely, desperately, with the kind of faith that only children and fools possess, that the system could be good, that heroes could be real, that justice could be more than a word carved into stone above a courthouse door. That boy was still in there, buried, beaten, but alive. Mirio Togata had dug him up. Izuku raised his hand. Cursed energy flickered across his fingers, dense, controlled. The energy of a man who had mastered abilities that didn't exist in this world's physics. Abilities that no one else could understand, counter, or replicate. He was the only one. The only being on Earth who could do what he did, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a responsibility instead of a weapon. "All right," he said to the empty street. "New case." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He'd been carrying it for weeks. A list. Names. Connections, locations, the web of influence that connected the hero system's corruption to the things lurking beneath it. He unfolded the paper and looked at the bottom of the page. 2 names, no addresses, no direct evidence, just whispers and money trails and the absolute certainty of a genius intellect that had never been wrong about a case, all for one, Tamura Shigaraki. Izuku folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. "I find the ones pulling the strings," he said. "I build the case. I bring the evidence, and when the case is airtight," the gavel manifested in his hand, heavy, final. I opened the court. He turned and walked into the rain, into the dark, into whatever came next. Behind him, on a rooftop miles away, Mirio Togata was wrapping his partner's ribs and thinking about a quirkless lawyer who carried a weapon that erased powers and spoke like a man who had already lived an entire life of trying to fix the world and failing. Ahead of him, in the dark places the hero system couldn't or wouldn't reach, All for One stirred. His network of informants had been picking up whispers for months. A vigilante. An unknown. Something that didn't fit the quirk taxonomy, didn't match any known combat profile, didn't make sense. The informants called the vigilante the defense attorney. All for One found the name amusing. He'd been around long enough to have seen 100 vigilantes rise and fall. They all burned out eventually. They all broke. They all either died or became the thing they hated. He wasn't worried. He should have been, because Izuku Midoriya was walking toward him. Not fast, not loud, not with an army or a plan that made noise, just walking, step by step. The way a verdict approaches, slowly, inevitable, and absolute. Hope, battered, bruised, skeptical of itself, but alive. Court was in recess, the prosecution was gathering evidence, the defense rested, but the trial, the real trial, the one that would determine the fate of a world built on broken scales, was just beginning, and the judge was already walking toward the bench. There's a moment in every story about someone extraordinary where the world catches up to what the audience already knows, where the people inside the narrative finally look at the person they've been underestimating and realize, truly bone deep realize, what they're dealing with. For the hero system of Japan, that moment was coming. It was walking toward them in a rumpled black suit with rain in its hair and judgment in its hands. And it was not going to stop. 3 days after the rooftop, Mirio Togata's quirk returned. Just like Izuku had said, confiscation on a minor charge was temporary. The power came back like waking from a dream, permeation sliding into place as naturally as breathing. He stood in his apartment, phased his hand through a wall, and pulled it back solid. Everything worked. Everything was the same. But Mirio wasn't. He sat at his kitchen table with two things in front of him, the commission's file on the defense attorney and a laptop open to every case Izuku Midoriya had ever argued as a licensed attorney. 42 cases. 39 wins. Every loss connected to commission interference. He read them all. He read about the factory worker denied compensation, the student expelled for being quirkless, the mother who lost custody of her children, the civilians who vanished from public records. He read about Ren Tanaka, about the trial, about the judge's ruling, about the evidence that proved beyond any doubt that Bright Flame had murdered 3 people. He read the ruling again. The court finds the structural analysis presented by the defense to be compelling but ultimately inconclusive. 3 people dead. Evidence of murder presented in open court. Inconclusive. Mirio closed the laptop. He sat in his kitchen for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Tamaki. "Are you healed up?" "Mostly. My ribs are still. I need you to do something for me. I need you to look into Judge Morimoto. Quietly. Can you do that?" Silence on the other end. "Mirio, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done before we chased a teenager across a rooftop." "Mirio, he was right, Tamaki. About all of it. The system is broken. I saw it inside his... whatever that was, that courtroom. The thing that showed me everything. It showed me everything about myself, and I thought it was about judging me. But it wasn't. It was about showing me the truth. And the truth is that I've been fighting for a system that doesn't fight for the people it's supposed to protect." Tamaki was quiet for a while. "So what do we do?" Mirio's smile, the one that had survived everything, the one that Izuku Midoriya had recognized as the last weapon against despair, came back, brighter than it had been in months. "We do our jobs, the real ones, not the commission's version." And in a city that was starting to realize its foundations were cracked, the pieces moved. The commission tightened its grip. Investigations that should have happened were buried. Heroes who asked questions were reassigned. The wall between the public and the truth grew higher. But the cracks were already there. And through those cracks, light was coming. Not the bright, clean light of a hero's entrance, something different. Something that burned colder and cut deeper. The light of a truth that wouldn't stop being true just because someone powerful wanted it to. Izuku Midoriya was in the dark, working, building, gathering the evidence that would hold up, not in a human court. He'd learned the limits of that, but in his own. He was coming for All for One. He was coming for Shigaraki. He was coming for the head of the beast, the root of the corruption, the original sin that had shaped a hero society into a machine that ate its own. He didn't know how long it would take. He didn't care. He was a defense attorney. The case was open. The evidence was building. And when the time came, when the evidence was irrefutable and the charges were clear and the courtroom manifested for the final time, there would be no bought judges, no sealed evidence, no commission lawyers filing motions in the dark, just the law. Absolute. Impartial. Final, the way it should have been from the start. Somewhere in Musutafu, a rumpled black suit hung on the back of a chair. Somewhere in the dark, the gavel waited. Somewhere in the gray space between justice and revenge, a young man who carried the weight of 2 lives was learning, slowly, painfully, that the hardest case he would ever try wasn't against the system. It was against himself. The verdict on that case was still pending. But for the first time in a very long time, the defense was cautiously optimistic. The optimism lasted about 6 hours. Then Izuku went back to work. The apartment he'd been using was a 2-room unit above a laundromat in East Musutafu. No lease. No paper trail. He'd paid the landlord, an elderly quirkless man named Goto who asked no questions and accepted cash, 3 months in advance. The room smelled like detergent and old wood. The kitchen had a hot plate. The bathroom had a shower that only ran cold. The desk was a door balanced on 2 sawhorses, and on that desk was the most dangerous collection of documents in Japan. Izuku sat in front of it at 4 in the morning, a cup of instant coffee growing cold beside his elbow, and he read. He'd been reading for weeks, months, really, if you counted the preliminary research. But the last 3 weeks had been different. The last 3 weeks had been the kind of reading that changes the shape of your understanding, the moment where scattered data points stop being noise and start being a picture. All for One's network wasn't a network. It was a country. Underground, invisible, running parallel to the hero society that Japan believed was the whole story. It had its own economy, quirk trafficking, information brokerage, blackmail revenue, and the quiet taxation of every major villain operation within a 500-mile radius. It had its own infrastructure, safe houses, weapons caches, communication relays, medical facilities that specialized in quirk augmentation surgery. It had its own military, not the League of Villains, which was a public-facing distraction, but a deeper layer of operatives who had been embedded in Japanese society for decades. Some in law enforcement, some in government, some in hero agencies, some in the commission itself. Izuku had suspected that last part. Now he had proof. 3 commission liaisons, 2 regional directors, 1 member of the Senior Oversight Council, all receiving payments from shell companies that traced back through 14 layers of corporate obfuscation to accounts controlled by All for One's financial apparatus. The payments weren't bribes, they were salaries. These people didn't work for the commission. They worked for All for One, and the commission was their cover. Izuku mapped it on his wall, thread by thread, name by name. A web that stretched from street-level enforcers to the halls of institutional power, connected at every junction by money and fear and the quiet understanding that the man at the top had been doing this longer than any of them had been alive. He sat back in his chair and looked at the web. It was the biggest case he'd ever built. Bigger than Bright Flame. Bigger than the Syndicate. Bigger than anything Higuruma had seen in either lifetime. And it had a hole. The evidence was strong. It was damning. It would hold in any court. His court, a public court, any court. But it was indirect. Financial records, communication intercepts, testimony from low-level operatives who knew pieces but never the whole picture. Izuku could prove the network existed. He could prove it was massive. He could prove it had corrupted the hero system from the inside. What he couldn't prove, not yet, was that All for One was at the center of it. The man had been doing this for over a century. He didn't leave fingerprints. He didn't attend meetings. He didn't sign documents or send emails or appear on security footage. He operated through intermediaries so layered that most of them didn't know they were working for him. Izuku needed the middle layer. The people close enough to All for One to have seen his face, heard his orders, witnessed his crimes directly. The people who could connect the evidence to the man. And those people were kept in places that didn't appear on any map. Commission black sites. Off-the-books facilities operated under the thinnest veneer of legal authority. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they were where the commission stored everything it didn't want the public to know about. Confiscated quirk-related technology, classified research data, and if Izuku's sources were right, people who knew too much. People who had seen too much. People who had been disappeared not because they were criminals, but because they were witnesses. Izuku finished his coffee. It was cold. He didn't care. He pulled up his laptop and opened the file labeled Black Site 04. It was a facility in the mountains northwest of Tokyo, disguised as a decommissioned weather research station. His sources said it housed experimental subjects, civilians who had been pulled from the quirkless population for quirk factor testing. The kind of testing that would end careers and start criminal investigations if it ever reached a courtroom. It was also, according to a communication intercept from 6 days ago, scheduled to receive a transfer of classified documents from one of All for One's Compromise Commission directors. Documents that would link the Commission's Black Site program directly to All for One's research into quirk augmentation. The transfer was happening in 2 days. Izuku closed the laptop. He stood up. He stood up. He stretched, his back popped in 3 places, the accumulated debt of hours hunched over documents. He looked at the gavel. It sat on the edge of the desk, manifested but inert, dark and dense and patient. He'd gotten into the habit of keeping it out. It helped him think. Something about the weight of it, the presence of it, grounded the part of his brain that Higuruma had sharpened into a weapon. 2 days, he said to the empty room. He picked up the gavel. It hummed. Time to go to work. The mountains northwest of Tokyo were cold in late November. The kind of cold that settled into your joints and made you question every decision that had led you to standing on a forested ridge at 2 a.m. with frost on your eyelashes. Izuku didn't feel it. Cursed energy circulated through his body in a slow, constant loop, maintaining core temperature, keeping his muscles warm and responsive. One of the small advantages of a power system that treated the human body as a conductor rather than a vessel. Environmental factors became suggestions instead of constraints. He crouched in the tree line above the facility and it observed. Black Site 04 was exactly what his sources had described. A cluster of gray buildings nestled in a valley, surrounded by a perimeter fence that hummed with electrical current. 2 guard posts, rotating patrols, 4 guards per shift, 12-hour rotations, quirk-enhanced. Security cameras on every building, plus motion sensors in the tree line that Izuku had already identified and mapped. The motion sensors were sophisticated, military grade, the kind that detected body heat, air displacement, and electromagnetic variance simultaneously. They did not detect cursed energy, because no one in this world knew cursed energy existed. Izuku slipped through the sensor grid like smoke through a screen door. The perimeter fence was 12 feet high, electrified, topped with razor wire. Izuku gathered cursed energy in his legs, crouched, and jumped. He cleared the fence by 4 feet, silent, and landed on the other side without a sound. The frost on the grass didn't even crunch. He distributed his weight through CE reinforcement, spreading the impact across such a wide surface area that his landing pressure was lighter than a cat's. He moved toward the main building. The first patrol was 40 meters ahead, 2 guards, both quirk-enhanced, walking a standard figure-8 pattern around the central structure. Guard 1 had a thermal vision quirk. His eyes glowed faintly orange in the dark. Guard 2 had some kind of density shifting ability. His body mass fluctuated as he walked, suggesting he could harden at will. Izuku waited until they reached the far end of their patrol loop. 30-meter gap. 20 seconds before they turned, he crossed the open ground in 4 seconds. The main building's side entrance was a reinforced steel door with a biometric lock. Izuku placed his palm against the lock. Cursed energy flowed from his hand into the mechanism, not forcing it, but interfacing with it. The electronic components inside the lock reacted to the energy the same way they reacted to a power surge. The circuit tripped. The lock clicked open. Inside, the hallway was lit with pale fluorescent panels, white walls, white floor. The sterile, dead air smell of a facility that prioritized containment over comfort. Security cameras at every junction angles calculated their blind spots and moved through them without breaking stride. He was looking for 2 things: the documents being transferred from the compromised director and the experimental subjects. He found the subjects first. The lower level of the facility was accessed through a keycard elevator. Izuku didn't have a keycard. He pried the elevator doors open with CE-reinforced fingers, grabbed the cable, and slid down 3 floors to the basement. The basement was a different world. Cells, 12 of them. Reinforced glass fronts, concrete walls, drainage systems in the floors, medical equipment mounted on articulated arms. The kind designed for long-term, repeated procedures. IV stands, monitoring stations, and in the cells, on thin mattresses under thin blankets, people. Quirkless people. Izuku walked down the row. He looked into each cell. He counted 12 subjects, ages ranging from mid-20s to late 50s. All quirkless, all showing signs of prolonged medical experimentation. Scars along the spine at the base of the skull, that along the forearms where repeated injections had left permanent track marks. He read the charts mounted outside each cell. Clinical. Detached. The language of researchers who had stopped thinking of their subjects as human. Subject 477. Female. Age 31. Quirkless. Quirk factor introduction. 17 attempts. Result, systemic rejection. Cellular degradation, 14%. Recommended, continued observation. Subject 043. Male. Age 47. Quirkless. Quirk factor introduction. 23 attempts. Result, partial integration. Quirk factor present but non-functional. Neurological damage, moderate. Recommended, escalated protocol subject 0411. female, age 28, quirkless. Quirk factor introduction 9 attempts. Result, total rejection. Subject, non-responsive since day 43. Recommended, disposal pending administrative approval. Disposal. Izuku stood in the basement of a Commission Black site and read the word disposal next to a human being's cell, and the lights above him buzzed and dimmed for exactly 1 second. He took photos. Every chart, every cell, every piece of equipment. He uploaded them to 3 separate encrypted servers. Redundancy, because evidence that existed in only one place was evidence that could be destroyed. Then he went to the cells. The locks were electronic, same as the front door. He opened them one by one. The subjects inside didn't move at first. Some of them had been here so long that an open door didn't register as a possibility. A woman in cell 047 pressed herself against the far wall and stared at him with eyes that had forgotten what hope looked like. "My name is Midoriya," Izuku said. His voice was low, steady, the voice he used with frightened clients. "I'm getting you out. Can you walk?" She stared at him. Then she nodded, slowly. Like she was remembering how. Izuku opened all 12 cells. 8 subjects could walk. 3 needed help. 1, subject 411, didn't move. Izuku checked her pulse. Alive. Barely. He picked her up. She weighed nothing. "Stay behind me," he said to the group. "Single file. Don't speak. When I tell you to move, move. When I tell you to stop, stop." 11 pairs of eyes looked at him. A young man in a dark suit carrying an unconscious woman like she was made of glass, standing in the ruins of their prison with an expression that said nothing and promised everything. They followed him. The extraction should have been clean. Izuku had timed the patrol rotations, mapped the camera blind spots, calculated the window for exit. He had a route planned. East wall breach, tree line in 90 seconds. Extraction vehicle 2 kilometers north. The extraction was not clean. The document transfer from the compromised commission director was happening tonight. Izuku had planned to come back for it after securing the subjects, but the director was early. 3 armored vehicles pulled through the facility's main gate as Izuku and the 12 subjects reached the ground floor. Headlights swept the compound. Guards at the gate snapped to attention. From the lead vehicle, a man in a commission uniform stepped out with a reinforced briefcase handcuffed to his wrist and a security detail of 8 not guards, heroes. Black Ops heroes, the kind the commission deployed when they needed problems solved permanently and quietly. No hero names, no public rankings, no accountability, just code names and clearance levels and the kind of moral flexibility that came from being told repeatedly that everything you did was sanctioned for the greater good. 8 of them. Izuku recognized none of them from public records, which meant they were deep cover. Their quirks were unknown. The facility's alarm triggered the moment one of the patrol guards spotted movement near the east wall. Izuku's planned exit point, now compromised by the arriving vehicle's headlights. Sirens. Floodlights. Every camera in the facility pivoting toward the east wing. Izuku set subject 4411 down gently against the wall. He turned the remaining subjects. "Stay here. Don't move until I come back." He walked toward the east exit. The door opened before he reached it. 2 of the Black Ops heroes were already there. They'd moved fast, responding to the alarm, covering the exit with professional efficiency, both in dark tactical gear. Both already in combat stances. The first one had a quirk that Izuku identified in less than a second: kinetic redirection. The air around her hands shimmered faintly, bending light in a way that suggested she could catch and return physical force. Anything that hit her would come back harder. The second had bulk. His body was oversized, muscles stacked on muscles, the telltale signs of a physical enhancement quirk running passively. Strength and durability. Simple, but effective at the scale he was operating. "Stand down," the kinetic redirector said. Her voice was clipped. "Military. You are on commission property in violation of..." Izuku's gavel materialized mid-sentence. The first strike caught the kinetic redirector on the forearm before she could finish raising her guard. Domain amplification was already active. The thin layer of his domain's aura wrapped around the gavel's surface, neutralizing the kinetic redirection quirk at the point of contact. The force she tried to catch and return never activated. The gavel hit clean. Her forearm bent the wrong direction. She went down with a sound that was more shock than pain. The bulk hero lunged, fast for his size. Enhanced muscles meant enhanced fast twitch fibers. His fist came in low, aimed at Izuku's midsection, thrown with enough force to crater a wall. Izuku sidestepped, 1 inch of clearance. The fist passed close enough to ruffle his shirt. He brought the gavel around in a short arc and caught the bulk hero under the jaw. The impact lifted the man off his feet. 300 pounds of enhanced muscle went airborne for a full second before hitting the corridor wall. The wall lost. 2 down. 6 seconds. The corridor alarm was screaming now. More boots. More voices. The remaining 6 Black Ops heroes were converging on his position. Izuku walked through the east exit and into the compound. The floodlights hit him full blast. He didn't squint. Cursed energy reinforcement kept his pupils from dilating, a minor trick, but useful. He could see everything. The 3 approaching from the north, the 2 flanking from the south, the one on the roof of the central building already in a sniper position, Quirk manifesting as some kind of long-range energy projection. Her hands glowed bright blue, building charge. The sniper fired first. A beam of concentrated energy, tight, fast, the diameter of a baseball bat, lanced toward Izuku's chest. He tilted his torso 45 degrees. The beam passed close enough to burn the air. It hit the ground behind him and carved a trench in the frozen earth. Izuku extended the gavel into staff configuration and threw it. The staff covered 50 meters in under a second. It hit the sniper in the center of mass and launched her off the roof. She hit the ground on the other side of the building. The staff ricocheted upward, spun twice in the air, and arced back toward Izuku like a boomerang made of judgment. He caught it without looking. The 3 from the north reached him at the same time. Coordinated. Professional. The first had a blade generation quirk, crystalline edges forming along her forearms. The second had some form of gravity manipulation. The ground beneath Izuku's feet suddenly quadrupled in pull, trying to pin him flat. The third had a smokescreen quirk, thick, black, sensor-disrupting smoke that billowed from his body and swallowed the immediate area. Izuku couldn't see. His body weighed 4 times what it should. Blades were coming from his left. He closed his eyes. He didn't need sight. Cursed energy perception, the ability to sense living energy through his own, painted the battlefield in his mind. 3 bodies, 3 positions, 3 heartbeats, each one spiking with adrenaline. Izuku compressed cursed energy into his legs and pushed against the gravity. The quadrupled pull fought him. He fought harder. His muscles screamed, his bones groaned, and then the CE reinforcement overpowered the gravity effect by brute force. He moved, the staff caught the blade user across both forearms. Domain amplification dissolved the crystalline edges on contact. The blades flickered, lost cohesion, crumbled into dust where the staff's aura touched them. Her arms were exposed. The staff's follow-through caught her in the ribs. She folded. Izuku pivoted blind, tracked the gravity manipulator by energy signature, and threw a CE-reinforced fist into the smoke. It connected with a jaw. The gravity field died immediately. Izuku's body snapped back to normal weight. The smokescreen user was running. Izuku could feel him retreating. The energy signature pulling away at speed, the smoke thinning as the distance grew. Izuku threw the staff again, through the smoke. 50 meters. A thud. The energy signature went still. 3 down. Sniper down. That was 7 total, plus the 2 in the corridor. 9. He recalled the staff. The smoke cleared. The 2 from the south were standing 30 meters away. They hadn't moved. They'd watched 8 colleagues go down in under a minute, and they were recalculating everything they'd been told about this target. Izuku looked at them. "The people in that building are civilians," he said. "Quirkless. Experimented on without consent. I'm taking them out. You can fight me or you can walk away." The 2 heroes looked at each other. They looked at the bodies on the ground, unconscious, not dead, every single one breathing. They looked at Izuku, standing in the floodlights with a weapon that absorbed light and a posture that said, "This is already over, we're just deciding how many more of you hit the ground first." One of them put his hands up. The other activated his quirk, a transformation type, body shifting into something armored and heavy and charged. Izuku reshaped the staff to hammer form, stepped inside the charge, and brought it down on the transformed hero's shoulder. The armor cracked. The hero staggered. Izuku hit him again, same spot. The armor shattered. The hero's quirk deactivated involuntarily. His body couldn't maintain the transformation with a shattered shoulder joint. He dropped to one knee. Izuku clasped his hands. He didn't open the full domain. He didn't need to. A partial activation, judgment manifesting for just long enough to render a verdict on a single subject. The Shikigami appeared behind Izuku for 3 seconds. Its scales tipped. Guilty. Confiscation. The armored hero gasped. Something left his body. His quirk, the transformation ability, the armor, the power that had defined his career. Stripped. Gone. His skin was just skin. His body was just a body. He stared at his hands. Izuku placed a folder on the hero's chest. Evidence of the Black Site's operations. Names, dates, procedures, everything. "This is your file," Izuku said. "You were following orders. The orders were illegal. Whether you knew is between you and whatever conscience you have left." He turned away. The hero with his hands up was still standing there, shaking. "Leave." "Leave," Izuku said. The man left. Izuku went back inside. He collected the 12 subjects. He collected subject 411, who was still breathing, still unconscious, still alive because Izuku intended her to stay that way. And he collected the briefcase. The compromised commission director was unconscious beside his vehicle. Izuku had dealt with him on the way back inside with a single strike through the car door that the man had never seen coming. The briefcase's handcuff was irrelevant. A focused pulse of cursed energy shattered the chain. Izuku opened the case. Inside, 3 drives, encrypted, marked with classification stamps that didn't correspond to any official commission system, like private encryption, all for one's encryption. Izuku pocketed the drives. He led the 12 subjects north. 2 kilometers through frozen forest, carrying subject 0411, moving at a pace the weakened civilians could manage. He'd arranged transport, a van paid for in cash, driven by a contact from the Quirkless community network who asked no questions. The subjects were loaded. The van drove north. Izuku gave the driver a phone number. A doctor, Quirkless friendly, who operated a clinic in Sapporo that didn't report to the commission. Subject 0411 opened her eyes as the van pulled away. She looked at Izuku through the rear window. Her mouth moved. No sound came out. But Izuku read her lips. "Thank you." He watched the van disappear into the dark. Then he looked at the 3 drives in his hand. "Now," he said, "let's see what you've been hiding." The drives took 4 days to decrypt. Izuku had to build his own decryption framework. The encryption wasn't standard. It was layered, rotating, designed by someone who understood both modern cryptography and the kind of paranoid operational security that only came from a century of practice. 4 days of code, 4 days of algorithms, 4 days of the kind of focused, obsessive intellectual work that Higuruma had called trial prep, and that anyone watching from the outside would have called terrifying. On the 5th day, the files opened. Izuku read them. He read them again. He read them a 3rd time to make sure what he was seeing was what was actually there, because the scale of it made his previous understanding look like a footnote. All for One hadn't just corrupted the hero system. He had designed it, not all of it. Not the original concept, the idea of heroes, the licensing system, the public safety framework. Those were organic developments, natural responses to a world where quirks existed and people needed protection. But the flaws, the structural weaknesses, the jurisdictional gaps and accountability blind spots and regulatory loopholes that allowed corruption to flourish, those were engineered. Deliberately introduced over decades by operatives placed in the right positions at the right times, pushing the right policy changes, blocking the right reforms. The Commission's oversight authority? Expanded by a politician who was a 3rd-generation all-for-one operative. The sealed records provision for hero-involved incidents? Written by a legal advisor who received payments from a shell company in the network. The Quirk Registry's privacy protections, the ones that made it impossible to track stolen quirks, championed by a civil liberties organization that was funded at its founding by All for One's money, every crack in the system, every flaw that Izuku had exploited as a lawyer and as a vigilante, every structural failure that had allowed Bright Flame to kill 3 people and wink about it in court. Designed, built, maintained by one man over 100 years with the patience of someone who understood that the best prison was one the prisoners built themselves. Izuku sat at his desk and stared at the wall. The web of connections he'd mapped was bigger now. Much bigger. It stretched from local courtrooms to national policy, from street-level enforcers to constitutional provisions. A century of work laid bare, and at the center, finally visible, the spider, all for one. The evidence was there. Direct communication from All for One to his top-level operatives, giving instructions, setting strategy, directing the network's operations. His voice, disguised but identifiable through pattern analysis. His decisions, traceable through the chain of command. Izuku had his case. He pulled up his encrypted communication channel and sent a message. One word, found. 3 minutes later, a response came from a number he'd given to only one person. What do you need from us? Izuku typed, time. Intel on Shigaraki's current position, and a favor. Name it. Keep being heroes, the real kind. The public needs to see that the system has people in it worth saving. Otherwise, what I'm about to do looks like destruction instead of renovation. A pause. Then, we can do that. Mirio says to tell you he's working on something. Won't say what. Says you'll see it when it's ready. Izuku almost smiled. Almost. He closed the channel and turned back to his files. The case was built. The evidence was airtight. But building a case and trying a case were different things. He needed to reach All for One. He needed to be in the same space as the man. Close enough to open the domain. Close enough to let judgment see everything. All for One hadn't survived a century by being accessible. He operated from the deepest shadows, behind layers of security that would make a national government envious. Getting to him meant cutting through every layer, one by one, until there was nothing left between Izuku and the final trial. He started planning. The first layer was the information network. All for One's eyes and ears, operatives embedded in every stratum of society who reported movements, threats, and opportunities. As long as the network was intact, All for One would see Izuku coming from 100 miles away. Izuku dismantled it in 3 weeks. He moved through Japan like a scalpel through infected tissue. Every operative he'd identified in the decrypted files was visited. Some were low-level, informants in police departments, clerks in government offices, janitors in hero agencies. They received folders, evidence of their activities, their payments, their handlers, and an offer, cooperate, or the folder goes public. Most cooperated. The ones who didn't receive visits from police officers who found anonymous tips about their activities impossibly detailed and impossible to ignore. The mid-level operators were harder. These were people with power. Minor villains, corrupt businessmen, compromised officials with quirks and resources, and the will to fight back. In Osaka, a teleporter who served as All for One's primary courier tried to jump Izuku between dimensions. Izuku's domain amplification negated the spatial displacement at the contact point. The teleportation field hit his body and broke apart. The courier found himself standing in the same alley he'd started in, facing a young man with a gavel, realizing that the one advantage he'd spent his career relying on was worth exactly nothing. The fight lasted 8 seconds. In Hokkaido, a mind reader who screened targets for the network tried to scan Izuku's thoughts. The cursed energy in Izuku's brain was like static to the quirk, unintelligible, overwhelming, a frequency the mind reader's ability couldn't parse. The man grabbed his own head and screamed. Izuku caught him before he fell, sat him in a chair, and waited for the headache to pass. "I'll ask once," Izuku said. "Where does your information go when you send it up the chain?" The mind reader told him. Not because Izuku threatened him, because the man had just tried to read Izuku's mind and had seen, for one brief, searing second before the static overwhelmed him, what was inside. He'd seen the courtroom, the guillotines, the gray sky. The scales. He told Izuku everything and asked to be put in protective custody. In Fukuoka, an entire cell of operatives, 7 people, coordinated, well-armed, loyal to the network for over a decade, ambushed Izuku in a parking garage. They'd been tipped off by one of the lower-level informants who had pretended to cooperate and then sent a warning up the chain. 7 people, varied quirks, coordinated assault, enclosed space. Izuku ended it in 43 seconds. The gavel cycled through 4 configurations in that time. Staff for the initial 3 who rushed from the front, hammer for the reinforced quirk brute who came from behind, Hook for pulling the sniper off his perch on the second level, back to standard for the last two, who tried to use a combination smokescreen and electrification attack. 7 folders, 7 unconscious bodies. 7 complete evidentiary cases left for the police, each one a thread that, if pulled, would lead investigators deeper into the network. The information network collapsed in on itself. Operatives who hadn't been visited yet heard about the ones who had. Some fled the country, some turned themselves in, some disappeared into the civilian population and hoped they'd never be found. All for one was going blind. The second layer was the muscle. The enforcers, the soldiers, the quirk-enhanced operatives who provided the network's physical power. Without the information layer to direct them, they were scattered, disorganized, operating on old orders and growing increasingly paranoid. Izuku hunted them anyway. Every one of them was a loose thread that could hurt someone if left untied. A combat squad in Nagoya, an enforcement team in Sendai, a cell of augmented soldiers in a bunker outside Kyoto that had been operating as All for One's emergency response force for 30 years. The bunker was the hardest. 50 soldiers, various augmentations, some quirk-based, some technological, some a combination of both. The facility was underground, reinforced, designed to withstand hero-level assaults. Izuku entered through the ventilation system. He dropped into the main operations room, gavel already in hand, and the first soldier to see him had time to open his mouth before the staff swept his legs and a follow-up strike put him to sleep. The rest of the room responded faster. Weapons up, quirks activating, 50 against 1 in a confined space. Izuku fought them the way a river fights a dam. Relentless. Finding every gap, turning every weakness into an opening. The staff whirled in arcs that covered 360, catching bodies and redirecting them into each other. Soldiers with ranged quirks fired, beams, projectiles, concussive blasts, and every attack that touched Izuku's domain amplification aura died on contact. He moved through their formation, breaking it apart from the inside, turning coordinated defense into individual panic. 15 seconds. 20. 30. The bunker floor was littered with unconscious bodies. Izuku stood in the center, breathing evenly, a bruise forming on his left forearm where an augmented fist had gotten through before he'd adjusted. The reverse curse technique was already working on it, the bruise fading from purple to yellow to nothing. 47 down. 3 had surrendered. Izuku accepted the surrenders. He collected their intelligence files, their communication equipment, their operational records. He left folders on the unconscious soldiers and zip-tied the ones who might wake up before the authorities arrived. He called in the tip to 3 separate police departments simultaneously. Redundancy. By the end of the 5th week, All for One's network was gutted. The information layer was gone. The enforcement layer was gone, or scattered. The financial infrastructure was being seized by tax authorities who had received anonymous packages of documents so comprehensive that they barely needed to investigate. Just verify and prosecute. All for One was alone, or close to it. He still had the League. He still had Shigaraki. And he still had whatever he'd stockpiled in a lifetime of accumulation. Stolen quirks, hidden resources, the kind of personal power that made him dangerous even without an empire. But the empire was gone, and the case was ready. Izuku crossed paths with Mirio for the first time during the Nagoya operation. He just finished clearing a combat squad, 6 operatives, mid-level, found in a warehouse that served as a regional weapons cache. The last one had put up a decent fight. A barrier-type quirk took 3 gavel strikes to crack, but they were all down now, folders placed, evidence secured. Izuku stepped out of the warehouse into the alley behind it and found Lemillion standing under a streetlight. Full hero costume, arms crossed. The smile was there but muted, tempered by something that looked like frustration. "We need to talk," Mirio said. "We don't. The commission has issued a kill order on you." Izuku paused. A kill order was different from a capture order. It meant the commission had given up on bringing him in alive. It meant every pro-hero in Japan had been authorized to use lethal force against the defense attorney. Noted, Izuku said. "That's it? Noted? What would you like me to say?" Mirio uncrossed his arms. He stepped forward. The streetlight cast long shadows behind him. "I'd like you to say you have a plan that doesn't end with you dead in a ditch somewhere." "I have a plan. It doesn't end with me dead in a ditch somewhere." Could you be more specific? Izuku looked at him. Mirio looked back. Two men standing in an alley that smelled like rain and rust, having a conversation that both of them knew was more important than either would admit. You investigated Judge Morimoto, Izuku said. Mirio went still. What did you find? The silence stretched. Mirio's jaw worked. Izuku waited. Payments, Mirio said finally. His voice was quiet. The word tasted bad. Commission pension fund. Off-the-books disbursements to his personal account for the past 6 years. Everyone lined up with a hero-involved case that went the wrong way. How many cases? 7, including Tanaka. Izuku nodded, slow. The information confirmed what he already knew, but hearing it from a pro-hero, from someone inside the system, made it real in a different way. You've been investigating on your own, Izuku said. It wasn't a question. Tamaki and we've been pulling records, quietly. The commission doesn't know yet. They will, eventually. I know, Mirio's smile came back, smaller but real. That's why I need to know your plan. Because when they find out, I lose my license and Tamaki loses his, and the two of us become civilians with targets on our backs. Welcome to the club. Izuku. The first name, not Midoriya, not defense attorney, Izuku. I'm going after All for One, Izuku said. Mirio didn't flinch. He didn't ask who All for One was. He'd done his own research. The name had come up in the files he'd found, the shadow at the bottom of every corruption trail. When? Soon. The case is built. The evidence is ready. All that's left is the trial. And by trial, you mean my courtroom. My rules, my verdict. Mirio stood in the alley and looked at Izuku Midoriya, 18 years old, rumpled suit, tired eyes, the most dangerous person he'd ever met, and made a decision. What do you need from us? Izuku told him. The second meeting happened 12 days later. Different city, different circumstances. Izuku had just finished an operation in Yokohama, intercepting a shipment of quirk enhancement drugs being moved through a port that All for One's network had used for decades. The shipment was secured, the evidence documented, the crew unconscious and zip-tied. Mirio and Tamaki were waiting for him at the rendezvous point. A rooftop, because apparently rooftops were where all important conversations in this world happened. This time, the meeting was planned. Izuku had called it. Tamaki stood behind Mirio, hood up, eyes sharp. He'd recovered from their fight months ago, but Izuku noticed the way he stood, favoring his left side slightly, a ghost of the rib damage that the reverse curse technique hadn't fixed because Tamaki didn't have reverse curse technique. Izuku made a mental note. The commission's emergency session happened yesterday, Mirio said without preamble. 3 black sites compromised means they can't deny they exist anymore. The independent journalists you've been feeding evidence to are publishing in 2 days. I know. The Senior Oversight Council is split. Half of them want to come clean and cooperate with a public investigation. The other half want to bury everything deeper and go after you with everything they have. Who's winning? The Burial faction. The 3 commission members you identified as All for One operatives are pushing hard. They're scared. If the investigation reaches them, it reaches All for One, and they know what that means. Izuku considered this. Then we push faster. He handed Mirio a drive. Small, unmarked, the kind you could snap between 2 fingers and lose forever. This contains everything I've found on All for One's connection to the commission. Financial records, communication logs, the names of every compromised official, and the operational history of every black site in the network. It also contains the evidence from Black Site 04, the experimentation program, the subjects' names, their medical records, their testimony. Mirio took the drive like it was made of glass. What do you want me to do with it? Hold it. When I move on All for One, the commission will try to control the narrative. They'll call it a villain attack. They'll seal the area. They'll spin whatever happens to protect their own. I need someone on the inside, someone the public trusts, to release this evidence before they can bury it. You want me to go public. I want you to tell the truth, publicly, on the record, with everything. Mirio looked at the drive, he looked at Tamaki, he looked at Izuku. That ends my career as a hero. Probably. Permanently. Maybe. Mirio was quiet for a long time. Wind pushed across the rooftop. The city hummed below them. My career as a hero, Mirio said slowly, was supposed to be about saving people. It still can be. Mirio's smile came back. Full, bright. the one that survivors and civilians and every person he'd ever pulled from danger knew by heart. Then I'll do it. Tamaki put his hand on Mirio's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Izuku nodded once. He turned to leave. Izuku, Mirio said, when you face him, all for one, is your plan to kill him? Izuku stopped at the edge of the rooftop. His back was to them. The wind pushed his hair. My plan is to try him, Izuku said. What happens after the verdict depends on the verdict. And if the verdict is death, then I carry it out. He stepped off the edge. 3 stories down, silent landing, gone into the dark, Mirio and Tamaki stood on the rooftop. He's going to die, Tamaki said quietly. Maybe, Mirio said, but I don't think so. I've fought him, Tamaki. Whatever he is, wherever that power comes from, he's not going into this expecting to lose. Nobody expects to lose. Mirio looked at the space where Izuku had vanished. He's different. He's already fought an entire war in another life. I saw it inside that courtroom. Another life. Another world. He lived it. He fought it. He died in it. And he came back. And he came back. Mirio's smile softened. People who come back from the dead don't waste time on fights they can't win. Tamaki said nothing. He pulled his hood tighter against the wind. Below, the city slept. Above, the sky was empty. And somewhere in the dark, the case file grew 1 page thicker. The League of Villains hit the Quirk Suppression Research Facility on a Thursday. Izuku had known it was coming. The facility, Black Site 09, buried in the mountains south of Sendai, was one of the Commission's most classified operations. Unlike the other Black Sites, which focused on intelligence and containment, Black Site 09 was a research hub. Specifically, research into the suppression, extraction, and artificial replication of quirk factors. The facility existed because the Commission was afraid. Afraid of quirks growing stronger with each generation. Afraid of quirks that couldn't be controlled, countered, or contained. Afraid of a population whose powers were evolving faster than the institutions designed to regulate them. So the Commission had built a place to study how to take those powers away, and they'd used quirkless civilians as test subjects, because who would miss them? Izuku had discovered Black Site 09 through the decrypted drives. The facility's research data was extensive. Years of experiments, thousands of pages of results, and a pattern of subject disposal that made the blood in his veins run cold. But the facility also housed something else. Archival records from All for One's early operations. Decades-old data that the Commission had acquired through channels they'd never disclosed, and that linked All for One's quirk-stealing methodology to the Commission's own suppression research. The Commission had been studying All for One's techniques, trying to replicate them. Using them as a foundation for their own programs, Izuku needed those records. They were the final piece, the link that connected All for One's century of crimes to the institution that was supposed to protect the public from exactly those crimes. The League of Villains wanted the facility for different reasons, or maybe the same reasons wearing a different face. Shigaraki wanted to destroy it, wanted to burn the Commission's secrets and leave nothing behind. Wanted the spectacle and the statement and the pure satisfaction of watching something the heroes had built crumble to ash. All for One wanted something more specific. The archival records existed in that facility. Records that could implicate him. Records that had been leveraged the Commission held over him. Insurance that neither side would fully betray the other. All for One wanted those records destroyed. He sent his weapon to do it. Izuku arrived first. The facility was underground. Built into the mountain itself 3 levels deep, accessed through a tunnel system that ran beneath a decommissioned mining complex. The above-ground structures were facades, empty buildings, rusted equipment, the usual camouflage. Izuku slipped through the tunnel entrance at 2 a.m. The security was heavier than Black Site 04. Automated turrets, motion tracking systems, reinforced blast doors. None of it registered cursed energy. None of it stopped him. He reached the archival level, level 3, deepest underground, and found what he was looking for. Rows of sealed containers, each one holding drives, documents, physical samples. The history of the Commission's relationship with All for One, preserved in meticulous institutional detail, Izuku began copying. Fast. Systematic, drive after drive, his laptop pulling data at maximum speed while he photographed the physical documents. He was halfway through when the mountain shook. The ceiling dropped dust. The lights flickered. An explosion, massive, somewhere above, the kind that displaced tons of rock and sent shockwaves through solid stone. The League had arrived. Izuku secured the data he'd copied. He sealed his laptop in its case, stowed it, and manifested the gavel. Then he went up. Level 2 was already a war zone. Commissioned Black Ops defenders, a full squad, 12 strong, the facility's permanent garrison, were engaging League forces in the corridors. The sounds of it hit Izuku before the visuals did. Quirk fire, concussive blasts, screaming metal, the sharp crack of structural supports failing. He came through the stairwell door and walked into the middle of it. A commissioned defender, electromagnetic quirk, generating fields that deflected incoming attacks, saw him first. What the? Who are? A blast of blue fire tore down the corridor and swallowed the question whole. Izuku dove left. The blue fire passed close enough to singe his sleeve before domain amplification fully engaged. He rolled, came up in a crouch, and saw the source. Dabi stood at the far end of the corridor, blue flames wreathing his body like a second skin. His patchwork face split in a grin that had nothing behind it except heat. His eyes found Izuku and he tilted his head. Well, Dabi drawled. You're not commission, and you're not who I'm here for. Dabi's grin widened. Funny, neither are you. He threw fire, not the casual probing kind, a wall of blue flame that filled the entire corridor, ceiling to floor, wall to wall, hot enough to melt the reinforced steel panels on either side. The commissioned defenders behind their electromagnetic barriers screamed and retreated. The air itself crackled and distorted. Izuku walked into it. Domain amplification ate the flames at his body's boundary. Blue fire broke around him like water around a stone pier. His suit caught the peripheral heat, edges singed, fabric smoking, but his skin was untouched. He crossed the corridor in 5 steps, emerging from the fire column directly in front of Dabi. Dabi's grin faltered. He threw a concentrated lance, a tight beam of blue fire aimed at Izuku's face. Izuku caught it on the flat of the gavel. The flame scattered. He swung the gavel in a short arc and caught Dabi across the midsection. CE reinforced impact. Dabi flew backward, hit the wall, cracked through it into the room beyond. His body left a smoking outline in the plaster. He was already getting up when Izuku stepped through the hole. Dabi was tough. The flame quirk burned through his own body, and he fought through it anyway. Pain was just noise to him. What the hell are you? Dabi snarled, fire gathering again. Izuku didn't answer. He closed the distance in 2 steps and swung the gavel overhead, reshaping it to hammer form mid-arc. The flat head came down like a piston. Dabi threw up a fire barrier. Compressed flame, solid as a wall. The hammer went through it. Domain amplification dissolved the quirk effect on contact. The hammer hit Dabi's raised forearms and bent them both. He screamed through gritted teeth, and the fire on his body flared uncontrolled. A panic response, heat spiking in every direction. Izuku took the heat on his amplified skin and hit Dabi one more time. Temple, clean, measured. Enough to put him down without killing him. Dabi dropped. The flames guttered and died. Smoke rose from his body in thin trails. Izuku turned. The corridor behind him was half destroyed. Fire damage, structural damage, bodies on both sides. Commissioned defenders and League attackers mixed together in the rubble. He moved forward. Toga was on level 1. She found him in the junction corridor between the main entrance and the east wing. She was covered in blood, not hers, and her eyes had that bright manic gleam that meant she was having the time of her life. Oh, she twirled her knife. Blood arced from the blade. You're cute. Who are you? Izuku kept walking. Move. That's rude. I'm Toga. Himiko Toga. What's your name? Are you a hero? You don't look like a hero. You look like a salary. She lunged. Fast. Faster than most people expected from someone who looked like a high school student. The knife came in low, aimed at his hip. A harvesting strike meant to draw blood rather than kill. Izuku sidestepped. The knife missed by 2 inches. He brought the gavel around and caught Toga's wrist with the hook configuration. The knife dropped. Toga yelped. The sound was almost childish and tried to twist free. Izuku held firm. He pulled her off balance, spun her, and pinned her against the wall with the staff across her shoulders. Not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to hold. Toga kicked, squirmed, tried to bite his forearm. Her teeth hit domain amplification and slid off. I said move, Izuku repeated. You're no fun. She stopped struggling, pouted. Then her expression changed. The pout dissolved into something sharper, more calculating. You're him, the defense attorney, the one everyone's scared of. I'm not interested in you, but I'm interested in you. Your blood, it smells weird, like it's not all the way blood, like there's something else in it. She sniffed. Her eyes went wider. I can't copy that. Whatever you are, my quirk can't read it. I know. He released her. As the verse, she stumbled forward, rubbing her wrist. Go, Izuku said. Take your people and go. What I'm here for has nothing to do with the League. Toga looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, the manic energy faded and something else was there. Something close to curiosity, close to respect. The big guy's coming, she said. He's on his way. Whatever you're looking for, you better find it fast. She disappeared down the corridor, picking up her knife as she went. Izuku felt it before he heard it. The vibration in the ground. The subtle shifting of the building's structure as something massive approached. The air pressure dropping the way it did before a catastrophic weather event. The calm before something broke open. Then the ceiling of level 1's main atrium collapsed, not from an explosion, from erosion. The concrete, the steel, the reinforcement, all of it crumbled to dust in an expanding wave of gray decay. The collapse started at the center and spread outward at terrifying speed, eating through structural material like acid, through paper. Through the hole in the ceiling, dropping from the surface above, Tamura Shigaraki descended. He landed in the atrium on bare feet. The floor beneath him began to rot on contact, cracks spreading from his soles in every direction, the molecular structure of the concrete breaking down. He was taller than the last confirmed reports suggested. His body was different, muscles visible under pale skin, a physicality that hadn't been there before. The hands on his body, the preserved, mounted hands of his family, were gone. He'd shed them. What remained was raw, scarred. Covered in the red traces of the decay's advancement across his own flesh, his eyes found Izuku across the disintegrating atrium. Red eyes, flat, hungry. You, Shigaraki said. His voice was a ruin, graveled, damaged, the product of too many screams and too much anger compressed into a vocal cord structure that was barely human anymore. You're the one Master is worried about. Izuku stood still. The gavel was at his side. The atrium was crumbling around them. Decay spreading through the floor, the walls, the remaining support columns. Commissioned defenders and League operatives alike were fleeing because neither side wanted to be anywhere near what was about to happen. Tenko Shimura, Izuku said. The name hit Shigaraki like a physical blow. He flinched. His hand, the hand that could erase anything it touched, twitched involuntarily. Don't, Shigaraki whispered. The word came out like a threat and a plea in the same breath. Don't call me that. I will call you what the evidence requires. You are Tenko Shimura, and you are also Tomura Shigaraki. Both names carry charges. Shigaraki's lip curled. The decay expanded. A support column 3 meters to Izuku's left crumbled to dust. The ceiling groaned. Charges, Shigaraki's. You sound like a cop or a hero. Which one are you? Neither. I'm your attorney. Shigaraki stared at him. Then he laughed. The sound was ugly, harsh, broken, the laugh of someone who had forgotten what was actually funny and only remembered the shape of the act. My attorney. That's good. That's really good. He spread his hands, all 5 fingers, both hands, the universal gesture of someone about to erase everything within reach. Here's my plea. Not guilty. Now shut up and die. He charged. The decay reached Izuku before Shigaraki's body did. It traveled through the floor, a wave of molecular destruction, turning solid concrete into powder, spreading in a circle around Shigaraki's feet and racing outward. Izuku jumped. CE-reinforced legs launched him 15 feet straight up, clearing the decay wave. He flipped midair, oriented toward Shigaraki, and threw the gavel. The weapon screamed through the air, a dark projectile trailing CE energy. Shigaraki's hand came up. 5 fingers spread. The gavel touched his palm. The gavel didn't decay. The surface crumbled. A thin layer of the CE construct flaking away like dead skin, but the core held. The cursed energy that formed the gavel operated on principles that decay, a quirk, an ability rooted in this world's physics, couldn't fully parse. It was like trying to dissolve something made of a material that didn't appear on the periodic table. The gavel punched through Shigaraki's grip and caught him in the shoulder. He staggered. The gavel ricocheted into the air, and Izuku recalled it as he landed. Shigaraki looked at his hand. The gavel had left a bruise. a deep one. He hadn't been bruised by a weapon in months. His regeneration was already healing it, but the fact that the damage had happened at all, what is that? Shigaraki asked. Genuine confusion. Judgment. Izuku said, he closed the distance. The fight that followed tore the facility apart. Shigaraki's decay was everywhere. Every surface he touched turned to dust. He was spreading it deliberately now, running his hands along walls, columns, floor sections, disassembling the building around them to deny Izuku solid ground to stand on. The facility was collapsing in on itself, levels above falling as their supports vanished, the mountain beginning to shift as the underground structure lost integrity. Izuku adapted in real time. He reinforced his footing with CE pulses, each step creating a brief platform of hardened energy beneath his feet, allowing him to move across surfaces that were crumbling under him. He was dancing on destruction, each step a calculation, each movement a commitment to a position that would exist for only a fraction of a second before the decay swallowed it. Shigaraki was fast, faster than his frame suggested. The enhancements all for one had been feeding into his body, genetic modification, quirk factor stacking, had turned him into something between a man and a natural disaster. He closed distances with lunges that covered 10 meters, hands extended, fingers reaching for contact. Izuku kept him at staff range. The extended gavel whirled in continuous arcs, creating a barrier of strikes and sweeps that Shigaraki had to navigate through. Every time the staff connected, a hit to the forearm, the ribs, the knee, the CE impact staggered Shigaraki despite his enhanced durability. And every time Shigaraki's decay tried to work on the staff, it failed. The outer layer flaked. The core held. Shigaraki reached for Izuku's face with all 5 fingers. Izuku tilted his head. The hand passed his cheek by a centimeter. He could feel the decay, a cold wrongness that hummed at the edge of his domain amplification, trying to find purchase, failing. The amplification field treated decay as an external technique and neutralized it on contact. The wrongness touched Izuku's skin and stopped. Just stopped. Shigaraki's eyes went wide. He'd touched Izuku. 5 fingers, full contact with the amplification field around Izuku's body, and nothing happened. That's impossible, Shigaraki breathed. Izuku hit him. CE reinforced fist to the solar plexus. The impact folded Shigaraki in half and sent him skidding backward across the crumbling floor. He crashed through what remained of a support wall and kept going, carving a trench through rubble and dust. Izuku followed, step by step. Each step sure, each movement carrying the weight of someone who had already decided how this would end. Shigaraki's regeneration brought him back to his feet. The solar plexus damage healed in 3 seconds. He snarled, decay erupting from his body in all directions, a sphere of destruction that consumed everything within 5 meters. The air itself seemed to crack, particles of dust floating and disintegrating, the fabric of physical reality thinning around him. The decay sphere reached Izuku. It broke on his amplification like a wave on a seawall. The energy field around Izuku's body held firm. He stood inside the decay's radius and was untouched. His suit smoked at the edges where the amplification was thinnest. His hair moved in the energy turbulence, but his skin was whole. His body was intact. Shigaraki stared at him through the dying storm of his own power and saw something he'd never seen before. A person his decay could not touch. Izuku raised the gavel. He swung. The hammer configuration caught Shigaraki across the jaw. The impact was massive, CE reinforced, focused, delivered with the mechanical precision of someone who had been training these strikes for 2 years in an abandoned parking structure. Shigaraki's head snapped sideways. Blood flew. His body followed, spinning, crashing through rubble. Again, Shigaraki got up, regeneration pulling him back together, but slower this time. The CE-reinforced strikes were doing something his body struggled to heal. The cursed energy left traces in the damaged tissue, small residues that his quirk factor-based regeneration couldn't identify or process. Each hit healed a little slower than the last. Izuku pressed, staff to hammer to hook, cycling configurations, varying his attack angles, never letting Shigaraki his feet or establish a rhythm. He hit Shigaraki 12 times in 8 seconds. Ribs, knee, shoulder, jaw, temple midsection, forearm, spine, knee again, jaw again, and 2 strikes to the chest that sent him through the wall of the tunnel and out into the mountain's surface. They erupted from underground. Shigaraki, tumbling, body finally showing the damage despite his regeneration. Izuku, following through the hole, gavel reshaping to standard form. The mountain air hit them, cold, clean. Stars above, the ruined mining complex spread around them, dark and empty. Shigaraki pushed himself out of the rubble. He was panting, and his body was a map of bruises that were healing too slowly. His regeneration was fighting the CE residue and losing ground. He looked at Izuku with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite rage. Something in between. Something that looked like the first honest emotion Tamura Shigaraki had felt in years. Recognition. "You're not gonna stop," Shigaraki said. "No. And I can't kill you." "No." Shigaraki's hands clenched. The decay pulsed from his fists, eating the ground beneath him in expanding circles. "Then what? You beat me down until I can't stand? That won't work either. I'll keep getting up. I always get up." "I know." Izuku lowered the gavel. "Not a surrender. A shift. That's not why I'm here." Shigaraki's eyes narrowed. "Then why?" Izuku clasped his hands. "Domain expansion." The words were quiet. The effect was absolute. Deadly sentencing. The mountain vanished. The courtroom assembled, vast, endless, the guillotines lining walls that stretched into a gray infinity. The black stone floor materialized beneath their feet. The two podiums rose from nothing, heavy and final. The dead sky spread above them, neither dark nor light. Shigaraki found himself at his podium. His hands were on the wood. His body was held in place by the domain's absolute rules. He pushed against the restriction and it didn't give. He tried to activate decay. His quirk responded but went nowhere. Inside this space, violence was prohibited. The decay pulsed through his body and dissipated harmlessly. He was trapped in a courtroom, facing a podium like a defendant, because he was one. Judgment rose behind Izuku. The Shikigami's robes drifted, its scales balanced. The ledger opened. Shigaraki stared at Judgment, at the courtroom, at the guillotines. Something in his face shifted. The rage bleeding away, replaced by something colder. Something that looked like understanding. "A trial," he said. "A trial. And you're the judge. The Shikigami judges. I prosecute. You defend." Shigaraki laughed. Short, bitter. "Defend. That's funny. Nobody's ever asked me to defend myself. They usually just try to put me down." "The defendant is Shimura Tenko," Izuku said, also known as Shigaraki Tamura. "The charges are as follows." He didn't read them. Judgment read them. The Shikigami's ledger opened and the charges materialized in the air of the courtroom. Visible, tangible, written in characters that burned with the weight of absolute truth. The list was long. Murder. Mass murder. Destruction of property at a scale that defied categorization. Terrorism. Conspiracy. Assault. Kidnapping. Extortion. The erasure of entire city blocks. The deaths of civilians whose names filled pages and pages and pages of the ledger, scrolling in the dead air like a roll call that would never end. Shigaraki watched his own charges fill the courtroom. His face didn't change. He'd known what he was. He'd never pretended otherwise. "How do you plead?" Izuku asked. Shigaraki looked at him. "Does it matter?" "It always matters." Something in Shigaraki's jaw tightened. "Not guilty." Judgment's ledger turned to a new section. The trial began, and then it showed him everything, not Shigaraki's crimes. Those were already filed, they were beyond dispute. What the trial showed, what Judgment's absolute truth demanded be part of the record, was the context. Tenko Shimura, 5 years old, standing in a garden, his family around him, his father's hand raised, not in comfort, in punishment, because Tenko had said the word hero. Because Tenko had expressed the desire to save people. Because his father, Shimura Kotaro, the abandoned son of Nana Shimura, the seventh holder of One for All, had been broken by the hero system long before his son was born, had been left behind, had grown up with the wound of abandonment and turned it into anger, and turned the anger on his children. The courtroom showed it all, the screaming, the isolation, the locked rooms and the cold silence and the slow, suffocating erasure of a child's spirit. And then the courtroom showed the moment, the hands, the garden, the decay awakening for the first time. Tenko reaching for his father, not to destroy him, but to touch him, to be held, to be loved. And the quirk doing what quirks do when they emerge from trauma, the touch that killed, the chain reaction. The family collapsing around a 5-year-old boy who didn't understand what his body had done. And then the courtroom showed what came after. All for one. The shadow. The man who found a traumatized child wandering the streets of a dead neighborhood and saw not a victim, but raw material. who took Tenko Shimura and, over years, methodically, deliberately, surgically, carved Tomura Shigaraki out of the wreckage, the hands placed on his body, his family's preserved hands, mounted and attached a weight of guilt and rage that was designed to keep the wound open, to never let it heal, to ensure that the boy underneath the monster would never surface long enough to choose a different path. The courtroom showed the conditioning, the isolation, the controlled exposure to violence, the careful cultivation of hatred, aimed and shaped and directed by a mind that had been doing this for over a century. All for One had built Tomura Shigaraki the way an engineer builds a bomb, every component selected, every emotion calibrated, every element of the boy's psychology turned toward a single purpose, destruction. Izuku watched it all. He stood at his podium and watched the life of Tenko Shimura play out above the courtroom. Every moment, every deliberate cruelty, every choice that was made for him before he was old enough to make choices for himself, that Shigaraki across the courtroom. Shigaraki was watching too. His face was different. The mask of rage and nihilism was cracking, not falling, not gone, but cracking. Because Judgment's truth was absolute. And the truth included things Shigaraki had buried so deep he'd forgotten they existed. Tenko Shimura was still in there, buried under decades of pain and manipulation and the deliberate destruction of everything soft and human in him. Still there, Izuku saw it. The way he'd seen Mirio's truth. The way Higuruma had seen the truth in every defendant who'd stood before him. The human being behind the charge sheet, the person underneath the crime. But the crime was real. The charges were real. People had died, thousands of people, families destroyed, lives erased. The evidence was overwhelming and the guilt was absolute. Izuku stood at his podium and felt the weight of 2 lives' worth of legal understanding pressing down on a single question. What does justice look like when the criminal was built? Judgment waited, the courtroom waited. Shigaraki looked at Izuku, his eyes were wet. Not crying, not yet, but close, closer than they'd been in over a decade. The boy underneath the monster was pressing against the glass and looking at a man who, for the first time in Shigaraki's life, had not tried to kill him and had not tried to save him, had just shown him the truth. All for One built you to be this, Izuku said. His voice was different, quieter, not the flat final delivery of a prosecutor building toward conviction. The voice of a man who understood what he was looking at and what it cost to look at it clearly. You are both the criminal and the victim. That case is harder than anything I've argued. Shigaraki's hands gripped the podium. The wood didn't decay. Inside the domain, nothing decayed. The rules were absolute. What are you doing? Shigaraki said. The words were broken. He was fighting something inside himself and losing. Izuku looked at Judgment. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the charges. Hundreds of them, thousands, a litany of destruction that would fill courtrooms for decades. He separated them, one by one. The precision of a legal mind that had never failed to identify the relevant facts. He took the charges and he divided them into 2 categories. The first category, the crimes that Tenko Shimura was shaped into. The destruction that All for One had engineered. The violence that was the product of conditioning, manipulation, and the deliberate psychological destruction of a child. Not excused, not forgiven, but identified as what they were, the output of a system designed by someone else to produce exactly this result. The second category, the crimes that belong to Shigaraki alone, the choices made with full knowledge, the moments where the conditioning was irrelevant and the decision was his. The people he had killed not because All for One ordered it, but because he wanted to. The destruction he had pursued not as a weapon, but as a person. There were fewer charges in the second category. But they were there. Shigaraki was not innocent. He had chosen things. Terrible things. In moments where the choice was his and nobody else's, he had chosen to destroy. Izuku filed only the second category. Judgment scales tipped guilty. The words settled into the courtroom, not like thunder, like stone hitting the bottom of a well. Final, permanent, true. But the sentence, confiscation, Izuku said. Not the executioner's sword, not the death penalty. Confiscation. The most severe non-lethal outcome the domain could produce. Shigaraki's quirk left his body. The sensation was visible. A distortion in the air around him. Decay. The power that had defined his existence since he was 5 years old, the power that had killed his family and destroyed cities and made him the most feared person in Japan. It pulled free like smoke from a fire. The distortion floated upward, was drawn into Judgment's scales, and vanished. Gone. Shigaraki staggered. His hands hit the podium, his fingers pressed against the wood. The wood didn't crumble. His fingers pressed harder, his palms flat. His hands, his whole hands, all 5 fingers, touching something without destroying it, for the first time since he was 5 years old. The sound he made was small, quiet, the sound of a wound that had been open for 20 years suddenly feeling air for the first time. The domain collapsed, reality returned. The mountain, the cold, the ruins of the mining complex, stars above, dust settling. Shigaraki stood in the rubble, quirkless, powerless. His body, still enhanced, still modified by years of All for One's work, was intact, but the decay was gone. The constant, ever-present hum of destruction that had been his companion since childhood was silent. He looked at his hands. He touched a piece of rubble. It stayed solid. He touched the ground. It held. He touched his own face. His skin was there, whole, not crumbling, not rotting, just skin. Shigaraki fell to his knees. Izuku stood 10 feet away. The gavel was gone, dismissed. His hands were at his sides. Shigaraki looked up at him. The mask was gone. Everything was gone. The rage, the nihilism, the century of someone else's design. What was left was raw, exposed, terrified. Why? Shigaraki said. It was not a question. It was something that had been trapped inside him for 20 years and had finally found a crack big enough to escape through. Izuku looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had destroyed cities, at the boy who had wanted to be saved, at the product of a century of cruelty, standing in ruins, holding his own hands like they were something new and impossible. Because I'm a defense attorney, Izuku said. Even the worst defendants get one. He reached into his jacket. He pulled out a case file. Thick, heavy, complete. He placed it on the ground between them. Everything is in there. All for One's crimes, the experiments, the conditioning, the design of what you were made to be, the full picture. Shigaraki stared at the file. He didn't touch it. When your quirk comes back, Izuku said over his shoulder as he turned to walk away, what you do with it is your verdict, not mine. He walked. Behind him, Shigaraki Tomura, Shimura Tenko, knelt in the ruins and held his hands against the cold ground and felt it stay solid beneath his fingers. He didn't move for a long time. When he finally picked up the case file, his hands were shaking. But the file didn't crumble. The pages held. The evidence stayed intact. He read it. And somewhere, in the buried place where Tenko Shimura had been locked away for 20 years, something that had been dead a very long time began, slowly, to breathe. The storm broke 3 days later. The independent journalists published. The evidence from Black Site 4, the testimony of the experimental subjects, the financial records linking the commission to All for One's network, all of it hit the public on a Monday morning, coordinated across 4 outlets simultaneously. The commission scrambled. Standard protocol: deny, discredit, redirect. But the evidence was too clean, too comprehensive, too deeply corroborated. Every document had a chain of custody. Every witness had medical records. Every financial transaction had a paper trail. Mirio published the same day. He stood in front of a press conference, unauthorized, unannounced, organized through contacts in the independent media, and he spoke. He spoke for 90 minutes. He named names. He showed evidence. He described what he'd found in Judge Morimoto's records, in the commission's sealed files, in the testimony of the heroes who had been blackmailed into silence. He was calm. He was clear. He was Lemillion, the hero that millions of people trusted, and he was telling them the truth. The commission revoked his pro license before the press conference ended. It didn't matter. The cameras were already rolling. The story was already out. Tamaki stood behind him the entire time. Silent. Present. His license was revoked an hour later. Neither of them blinked. The public response was seismic. The commission's credibility, already fractured by months of leaked evidence and exposed cover-ups, shattered completely. Senior officials were called before emergency parliamentary committees. 3 resigned on the first day, 5 more on the second. The chairman of the Oversight Council attempted to flee the country and was stopped at the airport by police officers who had received an anonymous tip with his flight details and a folder containing evidence of 13 years of corruption. The hero system shook. Fan communities imploded for the second time in a year. Rankings became meaningless overnight. The distinction between hero and villain, already blurred, started to dissolve. And in the middle of it all, one question kept coming up. Where is the defense attorney? Nobody knew. He wasn't at the press conferences. He wasn't on the news. He wasn't taking credit. He was working. The 3 days of stillness were the hardest part. Izuku sat in the small apartment above the laundromat. The case file was spread across his desk. The final version, complete, every piece of evidence indexed and cross-referenced and verified. He'd been staring at it for 2 days. The file was ready. The evidence was irrefutable. All for One's crimes, the quirk theft, the empire building, the century of manipulation, the creation of Shigaraki, the corruption of institutions, the murder and disappearance of hundreds of people, were documented with the kind of precision that left no room for doubt. The case was airtight, and Izuku was sitting in a cold apartment, looking at it, not moving. He thought about Higuruma, not the techniques, not the combat skills or the domain or the gavel. The man, the human being who had walked into courtrooms for years and believed, truly, desperately believed, that the law could save people. That truth, presented clearly and argued well, could defeat power. Higuruma had been wrong. The truth had been ignored. The law had been bought. The courtroom had failed. And the failure had broken him so completely that he generated cursed energy from the fracture, power born from the gap between what justice should be and what it was. Izuku carried that fracture. He'd carried it for 2 years. It was the source of everything he could do, every technique, every ability, every impossible feat. His power came from the broken place where faith in justice met the reality of injustice. And now he was about to use that power to end a man who had been breaking the world for a century. The question that Izuku couldn't escape, the one that sat in his chest like a stone, was simple. Am I doing justice, or am I doing judgment? The answer was both. And the difference was smaller than he wanted it to be. He looked at the gavel. It sat on the desk, dark, dense, patient. He picked up his phone. He called Mirio. 3 days. I'm moving. Mirio's voice was steady despite everything. The revoked license, the public firestorm, the fact that his life as a pro-hero was over. Against who? Both of them. A pause. Izuku heard Mirio breathe, heard Tamaki's voice in the background asking something. We're with you. Mirio said. Izuku looked out the window. Musutafu at dusk. The skyline was the same as it had always been. Hero agencies like monuments, city lights beginning to glow. Somewhere out there, people were watching the news and trying to decide what to believe. Somewhere out there, the system was cracking open, and what came next depended on who reached the broken pieces first. Stay out of the way, Izuku said. This trial is mine. He hung up. He stood up. He put on his suit, the rumpled one, the one that looked like Higuruma. He loosened the tie. He rolled the sleeves to his forearms. He picked up the gavel. It hummed in his hand, heavy with purpose and the promise of finality. He walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, through the laundromat where old Goto was folding towels and didn't look up, into the night. All for One moved first. Of course he did. He had been doing this for over a century. He hadn't survived this long by waiting for his enemies to come to him on their terms. His network was gutted, but he was never his network. The network was infrastructure, useful, powerful, but ultimately disposable. All for One had survived the loss of empires before. He had survived the symbol of peace, he had survived imprisonment, he had survived everything the world had thrown at him because he was, at his core, a predator who adapted faster than the traps designed to catch him. And he had been watching. The reports from his remaining informants, the few that Izuku hadn't found, told a story that didn't make sense. A quirkless young man, no registered quirk, no known support items, operating with abilities that defied the known physics of quirk mechanics. Moving through combat situations that should have killed him with an ease that bordered on contempt for the opposing forces, All for One had lived long enough to know that things that didn't make sense were the most dangerous things of all. He couldn't identify the boy's power. He couldn't categorize it. He couldn't steal it. That much he knew instinctively. The way a predator knows when prey has spines. Whatever energy this boy operated on, it was foreign, incompatible. Like trying to breathe water, so All for One did what he always did when he couldn't steal something. He decided to destroy it. The industrial district on Musutafu's eastern edge had been scheduled for demolition for 3 years. Budget delays had left it standing, block after block of empty factories, warehouses, and processing plants, all hollow, all dark, all useless. All for One chose it as a kill zone. He gathered what he had left, not the network. The network was gone. His personal reserves, the stockpile he'd accumulated over a century of taking from others. Soldiers augmented with stolen quirks, each one a living weapon. Operatives enhanced beyond human limits, their bodies rebuilt around multiple layered abilities. 500 of them, drawn from cells across Asia that even his Japanese network hadn't known about. 500 enhanced soldiers, each one carrying 2 to 4 stolen quirks, armed, coordinated, deployed in a grid pattern across the industrial district, covering every approach, every exit, every sight line. And at the center, on the roof of the largest warehouse, All for One himself. He sat in a chair that had been placed there for him. A figure of impossible age and power, his body scarred by his history with All Might, his face a ruin of tissue damage that hadn't healed despite possessing regeneration. Quirks that should have restored anything. The scars were permanent. All Might had left them that way. Around him, the air was thick with stolen power. Dozens of quirks hummed through his body, each one ready, each one primed. Force multiplication, atmospheric pressure manipulation, kinetic absorption, energy projection, regeneration stacked on regeneration. The accumulated power of a century of theft. He waited. Izuku came from the west. He walked into the industrial district the same way he'd walked into the warehouse where he'd killed Brightflame. Hands in pockets, tie loose, gavel not yet manifested. He walked past empty buildings and through dark alleys and across cracked pavement, and the motion sensors and thermal trackers and quirk-based detection arrays that All for One soldiers had deployed all triggered at once. Every soldier knew he was coming. He didn't change his pace. The first engagement happened on the western perimeter. A squad of 20, various augmentations, ranged and melee fighters mixed, covering each other, deployed in a standard military formation. Izuku took his hands out of his pockets. The gavel materialized. He reshaped it to staff form and walked into them. The first soldier fired a concussive blast from a quirk embedded in his palm. The blast hit Izuku's chest. Domain amplification swallowed it. The concussive force dissipated it at Izuku's skin boundary. He didn't slow down. The staff caught the soldier across the jaw and dropped him. The second and third came together. One had an augmented strength quirk, arms like pistons, each punch packing enough force to flip a truck. The other had a hardening ability, body turning to something that looked like black glass. Izuku ducked the piston punch, feeling the wind of it pass overhead, and drove the staff butt first into the glass man's midsection. Domain amplification negated the hardening at the contact point. The staff hit flesh. The man bent double. Izuku pivoted and brought the staff around in a full arc that caught the piston puncher across both knees. He went down screaming. 3 down, 5 seconds, 17 left. They came at him in waves, 2, 3, 4 at a time, quirks firing from every angle. Izuku moved through them the way weather moves through a city, unstoppable, indifferent to the structures in its path. The staff whirled and struck and swept, and everything it touched went down. A fire type launched a stream of flame. Izuku walked through it. An ice type threw frozen spears. They shattered on his amplified skin. A telekinetic tried to pin him. The force broke on contact with his body's aura. A speedster tried to blitz him from behind. Izuku was already turning before the man arrived, staff extended, catching him across the midsection at full sprint. The speedster's own momentum did the rest. 20 down, 40 seconds. Izuku didn't stop. He moved deeper into the district. The next squad was larger, 40 soldiers, better coordinated. They'd heard the first squad go silent on comms and had tightened their formation. Izuku reshaped the staff to hammer form and broke through their formation like a wrecking ball through drywall. The hammer strikes were devastating. Each hit carried the full weight of CE reinforcement. Impacts that shattered concrete, cratered metal, sent augmented bodies flying like they weighed nothing. Domain amplification made him untouchable. 40 quirks fired at him from every direction, and 40 quirks broke on contact with his body's aura. It was like watching an army fight the weather. The weather won, 60 down, 80, 100. Izuku moved through the industrial district, and the district emptied behind him. Soldiers fell in ones and twos and groups. Every formation that engaged him dissolved. Every trap that triggered pressure plates, quirk-based snares, environmental manipulation, failed against an opponent who operated on principles the traps weren't designed for. He was tireless. CE circulation kept his muscles fresh. Reverse curse technique healed the accumulating micro-damage of sustained combat. The small joint stresses, the muscle tears, the bruises from the rare strikes that found gaps in his guard. He fixed everything that mattered and left everything that didn't. His suit was destroyed, his tie was gone, his shirt was torn across the chest, revealing skin that was unmarked beneath. 200 down, 300. The soldiers began to break, not physically, mentally. They had been augmented, enhanced, given powers that made them dangerous, and they were watching a single person walk through their army like he was late for a meeting, and they were in his way. The back ranks started to run. The middle ranks stopped engaging. The front ranks, the ones who could see Izuku's face, saw a young man with green eyes and an expression that said, "This is already over." And something in them collapsed. 400. 450. At 473, Izuku reached the center of the district. He stood in the open plaza between the warehouses. His suit was shredded. His hair was matted with dust and someone else's blood. The gavel rested on his shoulder, humming with energy, the weapon heavier than it had been an hour ago. Not physically, but existentially. It had struck 473 people tonight. Each one had been measured. Each one had been found guilty of something, even if the verdict was only the gavel's impact. The remaining soldiers, 27, stood in a ring around the central warehouse. They didn't engage. They watched. Izuku looked up. All for one looked down. They regarded each other across 100 meters of vertical distance. Two figures at the inflection point of a story that had been building for over a century. All for one stood. He did it slowly, deliberately. The movement of a man who had never hurried in his life because he had always had more life ahead of him than anyone else. Remarkable, All for One said. His voice carried. It had been engineered to carry, a stolen quirk that amplified sound that gave every word the weight of a pronouncement. Truly remarkable. I have lived for over a century. I have seen heroes and villains beyond counting. I have watched the rise and fall of powers that shape nations. He descended from the warehouse roof, floating, a levitation quirk, one of dozens that hummed through his body. He touched down in the plaza 30 meters from Izuku, the air around him distorted with the density of stored power. And I have never seen anything like you. Izuku looked at him. The body, the scars, the ruined face, the posture of absolute authority, the voice that expected to be obeyed. This was the source, the spider at the center of the web, the architect of a century of suffering, the designer of every crack in the system, the man who had built Tamura Shigaraki from a murdered family's ashes and called it progress. Izuku Midoriya, All for One, continued. Quirkless, defense attorney, vigilante. You carry a power that I cannot identify, cannot categorize, and I suspect cannot steal. You have dismantled my network, destroyed my infrastructure, and taken my weapon from me, all without a quirk. He tilted his head. The scars on his face shifted. I'm curious. Before I kill you, I would like to understand what you are. You won't kill me, Izuku said, and you don't have time to understand me. You have time to stand trial. All for One laughed. The sound was rich, cultured, genuinely amused. A trial. You truly are what they say. A lawyer to the bone. But trials require courts, young man. And courts require power. The only court that has ever mattered is the one where the strongest party dictates the verdict. You're wrong about that, Izuku said, and I'm going to show you why. All for One's amusement faded. Something else replaced it. Not anger. Interest. The detached, predatory interest of a collector examining a specimen he hasn't classified yet. Then show me. He attacked. The air in the plaza inverted. Atmospheric pressure compressed by a stolen quirk to a density that would crush a car, slammed toward Izuku from every direction. Simultaneous with the pressure, a barrage of energy projectiles. Bright, fast, each one carrying the destructive force of a small explosive, fired from All for One's fingertips with the precision of a machine gun. Simultaneous with the projectiles, A kinetic wave, a wall of invisible force that traveled through the ground at the speed of sound, designed to shatter Izuku's footing and leave him airborne and vulnerable. 3 attacks, different types, different vectors, all at once. The kind of opening that assumed your opponent could handle 2 of them, maybe, but the third would kill them. Izuku handled all 3. He jumped, CE reinforced legs, launching him above the kinetic wave. In the air, domain amplification absorbed the atmospheric pressure. The crushing force hit his body and died at his skin boundary. The energy projectiles struck him and dissolved, each one flickering out on contact with the amplification field, their quirk-based energy signatures neutralized. Izuku came down swinging. The gavel, hammer form, descended toward All For One's head with the force of something that had been falling for a very long time. All For One raised both hands, a barrier. Layered, multiple quirks stacked, formed between them. Impact absorption, kinetic redirection, force nullification. The hammer hit the barrier, domain amplification met stolen quirks. The barrier shattered. Not slowly, not in stages. It broke apart like glass hit by a bullet, the amplification field on the gavel's surface nullifying each quirk layer in sequence, faster than All For One could reinforce them. Impact absorption, negated. Kinetic redirection, negated. Force nullification, negated. The hammer came through. All For One dodged, barely. A century of combat experience and stolen reflex enhancement. Quirks pulled his body sideways in the instant before the hammer hit. The weapon passed his face by inches. The wind of it cut his cheek. Blood, old, dark, carrying the taint of too many stolen powers, ran down his jaw. First blood. All For One's eyes, what was left of them, widened. Izuku pressed. He reshuffled the hammer to staff and drove forward, each step closing distance, each strike precise and devastating. The staff moved in patterns that All For One's stolen combat instincts recognized as high-level martial technique. But the energy behind them was unreadable. The rhythm was wrong. The attacks carried a weight that didn't correspond to their physical force. All For One countered. He fired back with everything. Energy beams, force blasts, a stolen muscle augmentation quirk that turned his body into a close combat weapon. He was fast, a century of stolen speed quirks stacked on top of each other. He was strong, augmented beyond any single human's limits. He was durable, regeneration working overtime, layered with damage absorption quirks that spread incoming force across his entire body, and he was losing. Not fast, not obviously, but the exchange rate was wrong. Every attack All For One threw was absorbed or negated by domain amplification. Every attack Izuku threw landed, not always clean, not always devastating, but landing. The staff caught All For One's arm and the regeneration healed it. The hammer clipped his shoulder and the damage absorption spread it, but each hit left something behind, a trace of cursed energy that the stolen quirks couldn't process, a residue that accumulated in All For One's body like sand in gears. Izuku fought the way he argued, relentlessly, precisely, building toward a conclusion that was already determined. Every strike was a piece of evidence. Every counter was a rebuttal. Every moment of combat was the trial playing out in physical form. All For One fired a beam of compressed air, a focused column of atmospheric pressure that could cut through steel. Izuku sidestepped it and closed to grappling range. His CE-reinforced hand grabbed All For One's wrist. The amplification field suppressed the stored quirks at the contact point. All For One's fingers, loaded with half a dozen offensive abilities, went dead. Just fingers. Just flesh. Izuku pulled. Twisted. All For One's body rotated. A century of stolen quirks, and he was being thrown like a judo novice. Izuku pivoted and drove him into the ground. The plaza cracked. Concrete buckled in a 10-meter radius. All For One's regeneration fired. His body healed the impact damage in 2 seconds. He rolled away, came up firing. A rapid-fire sequence of energy blasts, force waves, and a telekinetic crush aimed at Izuku's skull. Izuku walked through all of it, the gavel in his hand. Step by step, he reached All For One. He swung, the gavel caught All For One across the torso. CE reinforced. Full power. The impact launched the most powerful villain in history 50 meters backward. He hit the wall of the central warehouse and went through it. The wall collapsed around him. Dust and debris erupted. All For One emerged from the rubble, standing, regenerating, but slower now. The CE residue was building in his system. His quirks were stuttering, The stolen abilities firing with fractional delays, the coordination between them degrading. He was fighting his own body as much as he was fighting Izuku. "What are you?" All for One asked. The question was no longer academic. It was desperate. "I told you," Izuku said. "I'm your defense attorney. Though I should clarify, I'm not here to defend you. I'm here to ensure you get a fair trial." He clasped his hands. Domain expansion. The plaza disappeared. Deadly sentencing. The courtroom swallowed the world. It was the largest domain Izuku had ever expanded. The boundaries stretched past the industrial district, past the plaza, past the warehouses, and the rubble, and the 473 unconscious soldiers scattered across the kill zone. Everything was inside. Every soldier, every piece of rubble, every atom of the space, All for One had chosen as his battleground. The courtroom was vast beyond measure. The guillotines that lined the walls stretched into an infinity that the human eye couldn't track. The black stone floor was a plane without visible boundary. The dead sky above was a weight that pressed on everything beneath it. The 27 remaining soldiers, the ones who had been watching, found themselves frozen at their positions. The domain's rules gripped them like chains. Violence prohibited. Movement toward the podiums prohibited. They were witnesses now. Nothing more. All for One was at his podium. His hands were on the wood. His stolen quirks were inert. Inside the domain, the rules were absolute. Every offensive ability he possessed was suppressed. He could feel them, the quirks, the powers, the century of accumulated theft, pressing against the domain's walls and finding them solid, finding them absolute. He was powerless. For the first time in over 100 years, All for One had no quirk that worked. Izuku stood at his podium. Behind him, judgment manifested. The Shikigami was immense, larger than it had ever been. The robes billowed in a wind that didn't exist. The scales, massive, golden, terrifyingly balanced, hung from one hand. The ledger, a book that seemed to contain the entirety of a life's truth, opened in the other. All for One looked at Judgment. For the first time in over a century, for the first time since he had stood in the shadows of a world that didn't yet know his name, his face showed something raw, fear. He hid it. Fast. The mask of composure slid back into place, but Izuku had seen it. Judgment had seen it. The truth was already in the record. The defendant is All for One, Izuku said. True name unknown. The charges are as follows. Judgment began to read. The list was not a list. It was a history. A century of crimes filed one by one, each one documented with the absolute precision of a Shikigami that knew everything. Every stolen quirk, name of the victim, date, location, circumstances. Every murdered witness, every disappeared civilian, every manipulated institution, every corrupted official, every designed flaw in the hero system. The charges filled the courtroom. They rose from Judgment's ledger in columns of burning text. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, stretching toward the dead sky in towers of truth that couldn't be denied, couldn't be disputed, couldn't be sealed or buried or dismissed. All for One watched his own crimes materialize around him. "How do you plead?" Izuku asked. All for One was quiet for a moment. His fingers rested on the podium. His ruined face was unreadable. Then he smiled. "Not guilty." The smile was genuine. The plea was a performance. A century of controlling narratives. Even now, even here, in a space designed specifically to strip away every lie, All for One couldn't resist the impulse to play the room. "The prosecution may proceed," Izuku said. Judgment's ledger opened. The trial began. All for One defended himself. He was brilliant at it. The man had manipulated legal systems, political systems, and social systems for over 100 years. His arguments were sophisticated. He reframed his crimes as necessities. He positioned his empire as a stabilizing force. He argued that without his influence, the quirk-based power vacuum would have collapsed into chaos long before the hero system could have been established. He was articulate. He was convincing. He was, in the cold, analytical sense, making the strongest possible case for his own defense. And Izuku destroyed it, piece by piece, argument by argument. All for One claimed his network prevented chaos. Izuku presented the evidence of wars his network had started for profit. All for One claimed his quirk theft was selective and purposeful. Izuku presented the names of children he had stolen from. All for One claimed the hero system's corruption was endemic and would have occurred without his influence. Izuku presented the documents from the decrypted drives, showing deliberate policy manipulation, planted operatives, and engineered institutional failures spanning decades. Every argument met its counter. Every reframing met the facts. Every sophisticated deception met the absolute, uncompromising truth of a Shikigami that knew everything, and a prosecutor who had never lost a case he controlled. All for One's composure cracked. Not in a dramatic way. Not with screaming or raging or the kind of villain speech that people expected. It cracked the way a foundation cracks. Small lines appearing in the surface, spreading, deepening until the structure they supported began to shift. He stopped arguing. He stood at his podium and looked at Izuku across the courtroom and saw for the first time something he had never encountered. An opponent he couldn't outmaneuver. Not with power, not with intelligence, not with a century of experience. Because the courtroom was absolute. Because the evidence was irrefutable. Because the truth, the actual truth, not the curated version that All for One had spent a lifetime controlling, was being spoken aloud in a space where lies had no purchase. Judgment, Izuku said. Judgment's scales moved. One side dropped. The weight of a century of crimes pressing down impossibly heavy, the accumulated suffering of thousands of lives reduced to a single motion of a golden scale. The other side rose. Empty. Nothing to counterbalance. Nothing to offset. Guilty. The word was seismic. It passed through the courtroom like a pressure wave. Every soldier, every piece of rubble, every atom of the space felt it. The guillotines along the walls trembled. The dead sky above seemed to press lower. Sentence: confiscation. All for One's stolen quirks left his body, not one at a time, not slowly, all at once. A century of theft. Hundreds of stolen abilities, each one taken from a person who had been violated in the deepest possible way, ripped free in a single moment. The distortion around All for One's body was immense, visible, tangible, a storm of power pulling loose from a vessel that had held it for longer than most people alive had been breathing. The storm flowed into Judgment's scales. It vanished, gone. Not returned to the original owners, that was beyond even Judgment's reach, but removed, permanently. Absolutely. All for One gasped. His body sagged. Without the stored quirks, without the physical augmentations they provided, he was small, old, scarred. The body of a man who had outsourced his strength for so long that his own flesh had forgotten how to carry itself. He gripped the podium. His hands shook. Sentence: death penalty. The gavel dissolved. In its place, the executioner's sword formed. Long. Thin. The blade was absolute darkness. A weapon made not of metal, but of finality. It absorbed light, it absorbed sound, it absorbed the attention of every conscious being in the domain, drawing their gaze the way gravity draws mass. All for One looked at the sword. The mask was gone, the composure was gone, the century of untouchable superiority was gone. What remained was an old man, scarred, stripped of everything he'd stolen, standing in a courtroom that had just found him guilty of crimes that stretched beyond any single lifetime's comprehension. He looked at Izuku. "You are something that should not exist," All for One said. His voice was different now, bare. The stolen quirk that had amplified it was gone. His natural voice was thin, tired. This power, this courtroom, this judgment, none of this belongs in this world. "You're right," Izuku said. "It doesn't. It belongs to a different world, if then a world where people generated power from suffering, and that power was used to fight and kill and die for things that mattered." He stepped down from his podium. "I am the last echo of that world, and I'm using it to do what it was always meant for." He walked toward All for One, step by step, the executioner's sword at his side, the blade humming with a frequency that the courtroom itself seemed to bend toward. All for One didn't run. He couldn't. The domain held him. But even without the restriction, Izuku didn't think he would have run. A century of power had given the man many things, but it had also given him pride. The kind that didn't allow retreat. "Any last words?" Izuku asked. All for One looked at him. The old man's eyes, damaged, rebuilt, damaged again by All Might, never fully healed, focused on Izuku's face with terrible clarity. "You'll become me," All for One said. "Given enough time, enough power, enough judgment, the man who decides, who lives, and who dies always becomes the monster, no matter how noble the beginning." Izuku stood before him. The sword was raised. "Maybe," Izuku said. "That's a case I'll have to argue every day." The sword fell. Quick. Absolute. The blade passed through All for One's body the way a verdict passes through a courtroom. Final, irreversible, carrying the weight of every piece of evidence that had been presented and every crime that had been proven and every life that had been taken without consequence for over a century. All for One dropped. The courtroom held for 3 seconds. Then it collapsed. Reality rushed back. The industrial district, the rubble, the unconscious soldiers, the cold night air, the stars above, All for One lay on the cracked concrete of the plaza. Still, the quirks were gone, the empire was gone, the century of influence was gone. What remained was a body that looked impossibly fragile for everything it had contained. Izuku stood over him. The executioner's sword dissolved. His hands hung at his sides. He felt the scales adjust, not just inside the domain, inside himself. A shift in something fundamental, the weight of All for One's crimes, no longer pressing against the future. Removed. Processed. Filed, case closed. He turned. The remaining soldiers, quirk-stripped, powerless, shaking, were beginning to stir. They looked at each other. They looked at themselves. They looked at the unconscious army around them and the dead man in the plaza and the young man walking away from all of it. None of them tried to stop him. Izuku made it 12 steps before the ground began to shake. The tremor started small, a vibration in the concrete, a rattle in the rubble. Then it grew. Fast. The buildings around the plaza groaned. Cracks spread through the pavement. The air itself seemed to fracture, as if reality was struggling to hold together under a pressure that came from somewhere very specific and very close. Izuku turned. Shigaraki stood at the edge of the plaza. His quirk was back. Confiscation on non-death penalty charges was temporary. Izuku had known that. He'd known Shigaraki's decay would return. He'd counted on it. Counted on the time between the sentencing and the return being enough for what he'd shown Shigaraki in the domain to settle, to change something. Looking at Shigaraki now, Izuku wasn't sure it had been enough. The decay was different, stronger. The absence of All for One's control, the link between master and weapon, severed by the master's death, had removed the last restraint on Shigaraki's power. It was evolving in real time. The air around Shigaraki's body crumbled. Not the ground, not a surface, the air. The molecules themselves destabilizing, turning to dust, creating a sphere of erasure that expanded outward with every heartbeat. Shigaraki's face was a war, rage and grief and confusion and something else. Something that looked like the aftermath of being shown your entire life's truth by an absolute judge and being told that you were both criminal and victim and the only person who got to decide what happened next was you. "He's dead," Shigaraki said. His voice was a wreck. I felt it. The link broke. He's dead. Yes. You killed him. I tried him. The verdict was death. I carried out the sentence. Shigaraki's hands clenched. The decay pulsed. A section of pavement 20 meters wide disintegrated. That was my kill. My revenge. He stopped. The rage was there. The fury was there. But underneath it, pressing up from the place where Tenko Shimura lived, something else was pushing back. The memory of the courtroom. The truth he'd been shown. The hands on his body that weren't his family's hands, they were chains, placed there by the man Izuku had just killed. I read the file, Shigaraki said, quieter now. The decay still raged around him, but his voice was different. Everything he did, everything he designed, everything I was supposed to be. And I don't know what I am without it. The words tore out of him like something that had been stuck sideways in his chest for 20 years. He made me. Every part of me that wants to destroy, he put it there, but it's still mine. It still feels like mine. How do I know which parts are me and which parts are him? Izuku looked at him, at the decay spreading, at the power that could erase a city block, at the young man underneath it holding himself together with both hands and failing. You don't, Izuku said. Not right away. That's the verdict you have to live with. Shigaraki's face twisted. That's not good enough. It's the truth. And the truth doesn't care if it's good enough. The decay surged. The ground between them vanished. A trench of nothingness 10 meters wide cutting through solid earth. The air above it screamed as molecules were erased and surrounding atmosphere rushed to fill the void. Shigaraki moved. Fast. Augmented speed. All for One's genetic modifications still worked even without the stolen quirks. His body was still superhuman. His decay was still apocalyptic. He crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat, hands extended, Fingers spread, all 5 on each hand, reaching for Izuku's body. Izuku activated domain amplification. Full body. Maximum density. Shigaraki's hands hit him. Decay met the aura. The same thing happened as before. The quirk's effect neutralized at the boundary, the molecular erosion breaking down on contact with an energy field that operated outside the laws this world's powers obeyed. But Shigaraki was stronger now. The decay pushed harder. Izuku felt it. Pressure against the amplification, the quirk's effect intensifying, evolving, trying to find a way through. The air around them turned white with molecular debris. The ground beneath Izuku's feet ceased to exist. He was standing on nothing. CE platforms forming beneath his soles as fast as the decay erased them. Izuku struck. CE reinforced fist to Shigaraki's chest. The impact launched Shigaraki backward, but he recovered mid-flight, decay arresting his momentum by erasing the air behind him, the void pulling him back to stable position. He came again, and again. Each rush more aggressive, each wave of decay more intense. Izuku met every attack, gavel strikes, CE reinforced counters, evasions timed to the millisecond. He was reading Shigaraki's patterns, adapting, finding the rhythm of the decay's expansion and positioning himself in the gaps. But Shigaraki was adapting too. The decay was learning, expanding in unpredictable bursts, targeting not just Izuku's body but the space around him, the footing beneath him, the air he was breathing. It was becoming harder to find safe positions. The entire plaza was a kill zone. Izuku hit Shigaraki with the hammer form. Ribs. The impact sent him tumbling. Shigaraki got up. Izuku hit him again. Shoulder. Shigaraki got up. Again. Spine. Shigaraki got up. He kept getting up. The way Mirio had gotten up. The way Izuku himself had gotten up on that rooftop 3 years ago. The fundamental, unbreakable stubbornness of someone who had decided they were not done yet. Izuku hit him a 12th time. Jaw. Blood flew. Shigaraki hit the rubble, bounced, skidded. He was up before Izuku's follow-up arrived. "Stop getting up," Izuku said. "Make me." "I could." "Then do it." Shigaraki's eyes were wild, red, wet. The rage was burning, but it was burning without direction. A fire that had lost its fuel source and was consuming itself. "Do it. Use the sword. Give me the death penalty. That's what I deserve, right? That's what the evidence says. That's what your precious verdict should be." Izuku lowered the gavel. "The evidence says you're guilty of the crimes you chose. The evidence also says you were built to choose them. Both are true. Both matter. Then what do you want from me?" The scream tore across the ruined plaza. The decay surged in all directions, a sphere of destruction that ate everything within 30 meters. Half buildings crumbled, the ground dropped, the night sky became visible through holes in reality itself. Izuku stood in the center of it, amplification holding, the destruction breaking around him like waves around a lighthouse. "I want you to choose," Izuku said. Right now, not what All for One chose for you, not what the hero system chose for you, not what I chose for you. What do you choose?" Shigaraki's hands were shaking. The decay was shaking. Everything was shaking. The ground, the air, the molecular structure of reality in a 50-meter radius. "I don't know how," Shigaraki said. The words were a whisper. The whisper was louder than the destruction. Izuku looked at him across the wasteland, through the decaying air, at a young man who had never been taught how to want something without destroying it. "Then learn," Izuku said. "That's not a sentence. That's an option. The first one you've had in your entire life." Shigaraki stared at him. The decay slowed. Not stopped. Not gone. But the expansion rate dropped. The frenzied, directionless destruction contracted, pulling inward, tightening around Shigaraki's body like something that was being held, and Shigaraki looked at his hands. The same hands that had killed his family. The same hands that had leveled cities. The same hands that had, in a courtroom that shouldn't exist, touched a wooden podium without destroying it. His fingers curled into fists. Tight. Holding instead of spreading. The decay went quiet. Not gone. Never gone. But quiet. Shigaraki fell to his knees. He pressed his fists against the ground, what was left of it, and the ground held. Not because the decay was absent, because he was holding it back. For the first time in his life, by his own choice, holding it back. He stayed there for a long time. Izuku watched. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. Some verdicts needed to be processed in silence. Eventually, Shigaraki looked up. "The file," he said. "The one you left me. I read it all. I know. He found me on the street. After my family, I was 5. He found me and he..." He held my hand. He was the first person who held my hand after I killed everyone. And it was all planned, the whole time. Every part of it. Yes. Shigaraki's jaw tightened. His fists tightened. The ground beneath them cracked. A tiny lapse, quickly controlled. "I'm not going to be a hero," Shigaraki said. The word hero came out of his mouth like something bitter. "I'm not going to pretend that's an option. Too much blood. Too many names. I didn't ask you to be a hero." "Then what?" "Something that doesn't have a name yet." Izuku met his eyes. "The verdict I gave you was confiscation, not death. That means the law, my law, says you get to exist. What you do with that existence is the only trial that matters from here." Shigaraki was quiet. The fists loosened. Not fully, but enough. "Court's adjourned," Izuku said. He turned. He walked away. Through the ruined plaza, past the unconscious soldiers, past the body of All for One, and into the dark streets beyond. Behind him, Shigaraki Tamura knelt in the ashes of everything he'd been designed to destroy and held his hands against the ground and chose, for the first time in 20 years, to let something stay. The aftermath unfolded over weeks. The evidence hit the public in waves. The first wave, the Black Site 04 data, the Commission corruption records, had already broken the dam. The second wave came from Mirio's press conference. The third came from the independent journalists who had spent weeks verifying the materials Izuku had provided. The fourth wave was the industrial district. The authorities found 500 unconscious soldiers, one dead body, and a crater where a plaza used to be. The forensic analysis took 3 weeks. The results were classified, declassified after a court order, classified again, and then leaked by an anonymous source who had a very good understanding of the public interest exception clause. The dead body was identified through DNA analysis as a match for the individual known as All for One. The commission had his genetic profile on file, a secret file buried so deep that its existence was itself a scandal when it was revealed. The most powerful villain in history. Dead. In a ruined industrial district. Surrounded by his own army, every single one of them behind Quirkless. The public didn't know what to do with that information. The hero system didn't know what to do with that information. The commission definitely didn't know what to do with that information, because the commission was, at this point, barely a functioning institution. The investigations began. Not one, dozens. Parliamentary committees, independent oversight bodies, international observers who had been watching Japan's hero system for years and had finally been given the ammunition to demand accountability. The commission's senior leadership was dissolved. Not restructured. Dissolved. Every member of the Oversight Council was placed under investigation. The 3 who had been identified as All for One operatives were arrested within the week. The chairman's attempt to claim ignorance fell apart when the financial records were presented in open court. Real open court. Public, transparent, the kind of courtroom that Izuku had spent his legal career believing in and his vigilante career losing faith in. Heroes were investigated. Most passed. Some didn't. The heroes who had been running the quiet corruption, the protection rackets, the evidence tampering, the sealed records and silenced witnesses were exposed one by one. Some surrendered, some fought, some disappeared. The system shook. The building stayed standing, but the foundations shifted. Every assumption, every article of faith, every comfortable belief about what the hero system was and what it was for was questioned, examined, tested against evidence that didn't bend. And through all of it, Mirio Togata stood in the light and told the truth. He testified before 3 separate oversight committees. He testified in 2 criminal trials. He gave 14 press conferences. He submitted written testimony to the Parliamentary Review Board that ran to 412 pages and was later described by a legal analyst as the single most comprehensive account of institutional failure in the history of Japan's hero system. His pro-license remained revoked for the duration. He smiled the whole way through, not the performance smile, not the media smile, the real one. The one that said, "This hurts and it matters and I'm not stopping." Tamaki stood behind him at every hearing, every press conference, every committee session. He never spoke publicly. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. The quiet partner, the steady hand, the person who stood with Mirio not because the cameras were rolling, but because it was right. Izuku watched the press conference on a small television. He was in a different apartment. He'd moved. The laundromat apartment was compromised after the industrial district incident. Too many people looking, too many agencies trying to identify the defense attorney. The new apartment was smaller. One room, a sink, a hot plate, and a desk. The desk was clean except for three things. The gavel, resting on its side, catching the light from the window, a blank piece of paper, and a pen. On the television, Mirio was answering questions. A journalist had asked him about the defense attorney. Who was he? Where was he? Was he a hero or a villain or something else? Mirio's smile widened. He's a lawyer, Mirio said, the best I've ever met, and I don't think he'd appreciate me giving out his contact information. Laughter from the press gallery, brief, uncomfortable. Nobody was quite sure what to make of a man who had fought the entire hero system and won. Izuku reached for the pen. He picked it up. Held it. He thought about Higuruma, about the man who had believed in the law until the law broke him, and the breaking generated power that shouldn't have existed. About the courtroom that had formed from that breaking, a space designed for one purpose, built from the wreckage of faith. He thought about a 4-year-old boy watching All Might on a television screen and crying because the hero was smiling, and the smile meant everyone was going to be okay. He thought about a rooftop. 6 words. The end of a dream. He thought about Ren Tanaka crying in a hallway, grabbing his hand with both of his. He thought about Mirio standing in the rain, quirkless, beaten, raising his fists. He thought about Shigaraki kneeling in ashes, choosing to let something stay. He put the pen down, he picked it up again. He wrote 2 words at the top of the blank page. Case open. He leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked. The apartment was quiet. The television murmured. Mirio still talking, still smiling, still fighting in the only way he had left. Izuku looked at the gavel. It gleamed in the dim light of the apartment, the dark surface reflecting the window, the city beyond, the sky above. It was heavy. It was always heavy. The weight of judgment carried in a tool that fit in one hand. His eyes were tired. His knuckles were bruised. The reverse curse technique had healed the cuts, but he still hadn't bothered with the purple. His suit was rumpled. His tie was loose. He looked like a man who had just finished a very long trial and knew there were 100 more waiting. He looked like a man who was quietly, carefully, for the first time in 2 lives, okay with that. Court's back in session, he said to the empty room. The gavel gleamed in the dim light. The case was open, and Izuku Midoriya, the only person on Earth who carried 2 lives worth of justice in his hands, was ready to argue it.
Huge salute to the legends fueling this journey. Your support is the engine behind everything we do. Whether you're on the front lines or reaching for the stars, you make this possible. Pro heroes, the elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. Dark Eye, DI, Fire 05, Govs LNS. Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community. The titans who keep our foundation solid and the hype at an all-time high. Kelvin Bowman, Mr. Panda, AZ Atros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, Damian Leon, Jacob Rops, Jan L., Christian Mullins, Bully Maguire Shadow, Neo Star Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Suna Wind 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Chris Talley, Remorsefuls, Blackvein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK Eater, Akeno Himejima, Corey Tokars, Jan, Devin Black, Crow, Dasher Games, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alistar, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie 60, Ignatius, Albert. Hope of the universe. the ultimate guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact shines across the galaxy. Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Kishan, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, Ixshoot X50, Greg Green, James, Quan Yin Thompson, Juan, Zeno KJ. And that is how a lawyer looked a century-old god-level villain dead in the eyes and said, "Court is in session." If this story hit different, smash that like button and subscribe because we are just getting started. See you in the next one.